Hello, I'm Riz Khan. As the world marks the first anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas in Israel, I'm presenting a special episode of the show featuring a world-exclusive interview with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog and leading Hamas spokesperson Dr. Basem Naim. I sat down with both men as they reflected on a turbulent year and considered the challenges ahead as the Middle East stands on the brink of a full-scale regional war. I'll begin with Isaac Herzog, the President of Israel, who spoke with me from Jerusalem. President Herzog, thank you very much, sir, for making the time for this interview. Now, the latest chapter of violence in the Middle East began with the Hamas attack on Israel 1 year ago. How do you expect it to end across the region?
I think we should find a way, following the terrible year that we've all gone through, as we mark the 7th of October of last year, which was a day of tragedy and pain of unequivocal magnitude for us and for the region. I think that we should now, when things are shaking in the Middle East, should find a common exit strategy that enables a better future for the people of the region. Clearly, as we see, this war has been waged on us by the empire of evil, by Iran and its proxies. We have 101 hostages still in the dungeons of Gaza in immense suffering. We are fighting in the north and in the south, meaning in Gaza and in Lebanon. We are trying to change the equation and bring a hope for the people of the Middle East. And now is a golden opportunity for the powers that want to have a better future for the Middle East to move forward with new ideas and new plans in order to resolve this conflict and exit from the war. But I'm not sure, as I read our enemies, that they are there still.
Mr. President, based on what you're saying, for Israelis, do you think the first anniversary of October the 7th should be marked as a day of reflection and remembrance, or one of revenge and retaliation?
We are not dealing with revenge and retaliation. We are first dealing with a lot of pain and agony. I can tell you, as the head of state of Israel, I've seen enormous pain and agony that I've never imagined I would see in my life. I see enormous pain and agony of hostage families, of wounded people, of bereaving families, immense amount of bereaving families, of communities that have been displaced and so forth and so on all around the country. And the real issue is that we understand that there was a huge opportunity that was laid out originally by President Biden, actually, just before the war, of the connectivity of Israel all the way to India, through the Middle East, through Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and so forth, that would bring hope and a huge message of peace in the region. And this hope was derailed by this vicious, horrific attack of the Iranian proxies by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis from Yemen, and proxies in Iraq and so forth. Now it's a big challenge, but if we change the equation and uproot this empire of evil and move forward to a better future of connectivity and peace in the region, this could be of historic magnitude.
You know, sir, after an attack that was clearly quite brutal, a year that began with Israel receiving almost universal sympathy and support from the international community seems to be ending with it being seen by many now as a global pariah. Now, isn't that a damning verdict on Israel's response to that attack?
We know that we are being attacked as part of the entire war machine against us, attacked in the international legal forums, attacked in public opinion, attacked on campuses and so forth. But we truly believe in our vision. We are a democracy. We are an oasis in the Middle East. We have Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze and Circassians living and dwelling together. Unfortunately, yesterday, Hezbollah has attacked in missiles a bunch of Muslim towns and cities, our brothers and sisters, we are with them in this war. This is the real reality of the region. The real reality that we're offering the region is a reality of coexistence and living together, making, of course, peace agreements and surfing towards accommodating each other. We are all the children of Abraham, and I call upon the people of Lebanon, the people of Iran, the people of all of the oppressed nations in the region to rise up and understand that if we move this empire of evil, truly an empire of evil, if we confront it and be tough together, we surely can hope for a better future and create a NATO-like structure in the region that blocks radicalism and terror.
Well, sir, last week's missile attack by Iran on Israel caused relatively little damage. Is the retaliation worth provoking a wider war, global recession, further strikes on Israel?
So first of all, I can tell you as somebody who was in the shelter that it is extremely unpleasant, naturally. 181 missiles, big missiles on Israel. It's one can think it's one of the largest attacks in one shot on any country, and clearly deserves an answer. But we are considering our reply, and we are considering the next step of how to prevent and how to deter the Iranian war machine. And since I'm not part of this, it's not under my responsibility, I leave it up to the government and the military, and I think we are calculating all calculations in this respect. But one has to understand Iran is the only country in the world who calls for the eradication of another member state of the United Nations. That's Israel. And they keep on saying it all the time. I saw the speech of the supreme leader. There was no message of accommodation or extending a hand or saying, let's move together, and two great nations, historic nations, to move together and help change the life of people in the Middle East. Rather, you see Iran spending billions of dollars of their own citizens' money on a huge war machine, on other people's infrastructure, which are all aimed to create pain, havoc, rape, burn, take hostages, and chop and destroy. So either we offer hope or we go for destruction. Iran offers destruction, we are offering hope.
Well, Mr. President, as obviously a person in your position, could you confirm whether or not there would be a retaliation against Iran, and how soon?
I cannot go into any detail, of course. I think the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu were pretty clear. But having said that, we are, of course, looking on the grand picture and understanding all of the various calculations and interests, and yet it is clear to us that being attacked in such an aggressive manner and brutal manner needs retaliation and an answer that will deter our enemies.
Considering how you describe it, Mr. President, would Israel, or would you advocate Israel going as far as eliminating Iran's oil facilities, its nuclear sites, even its leaders?
I have no intention of responding to your question.
Okay, so
don't take it personally.
No, I understand. But has the US given you any go-ahead for any attack on Iran, from what you know?
So we have an intense dialogue with the United States, our closest ally and friend. We have an open, frank, and friendly discussion with them on analyzing both the strategic issues as well as the various operational considerations on the ground. Today, the commander of CENTCOM, General Kurilla, is going to visit Israel, and I'm sure it's going to be the main topic of the day.
Mr. President, you've claimed that Israel's attack in Beirut, which killed the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and many of its senior commanders, ended a meeting that was planning an October the 7th style invasion from Lebanon. When will you present any proof of such a claim?
Well, you know, we have been gathering a lot of information and intelligence on Hezbollah and its operations, including Hassan Nasrallah. We know exactly what they were planning to do. And I must say that, we don't expose our sources, but nobody can deny that, because they've had the Radwan forces on our border, and they've launched endless attacks on Israel cross borders since October 8th with no real reason. They violated the international border. They violated Security Council resolutions and numerous UN resolutions. They actually brought Lebanon into a huge risk. They were part of a major axis of evil that tried to surround us from all over, and it was clear that with this exchange of fire going on, that they were planning something strategic.
Although the Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib claimed that the former Hezbollah Secretary General had agreed to a temporary 21-day ceasefire before he was eliminated. From what you know, is that true?
I have no idea of that information, and we don't have any proof to that effect. To the contrary, as far as we know, there was no willingness on their part, just like there's no willingness on the part of Sinwar in Gaza to move on a hostage deal. There's a lot of fake news going on in the region and the world, and let's put the record straight. On October 7th, a terror attack was launched from Gaza. Thousands of terrorists broke into Israel, burning, chopping, raping, kidnapping innocent civilians. By the way, many of them the biggest supporters of peace in the region. And thereafter, an enormous onslaught from all over, including from Yemen, by the way, which is another example of what a proxy is all about. It's a small tribe armed up to its neck by Iranian money and Iranian resources, and then threatening the entire high seas transportation in the world, raising the cost of living of every person around the globe. So if you look at it objectively, what Iran is doing is not only radicalizing the entire region, it's threatening the entire world, and it's trying to undermine the sovereignty of many nations in the region as well and in the world. Now, like terror and other proxies.
Now, President Herzog, of course, what Hamas and its allies did on October the 7th have been described as war crimes. Can you rule out that any war crimes have been committed by Israel since October the 7th? Can you definitively rule that out?
Yes, I definitely rule that out. I know and exactly how we operate. We have legal counsel to every unit, even small units. We follow the exact rules of international humanitarian law. And I want to say something. I care for our neighbors. I care. I deeply care. We care. We care for the pain of our neighbors, but we have the right to defend ourselves. And when we are defending ourselves, we are defending ourselves from missiles in people's homes, in people's shops, in people's mosques, in people's playgrounds or schools. It's unbelievably annoying when you see this in Gaza or in southern Lebanon or throughout Lebanon. It's unacceptable. This is what the world needs to do. People who believe in peace and freedom in the region and the world needs to stand up and say, this is unacceptable. Don't put any missile in your living room or in your sleeping room or anywhere else. Just get it out of there. And if you and put sovereignty of nations like the government of Lebanon to run the border with Israel and not through Hezbollah.
I would ask you, President Herzog, how you would account for the way Israeli soldiers have behaved with their posting of all the things they've been doing, because that doesn't show much caring.
So I will say, look, we mobilized about 500,000 people. People left their jobs and schools and any other things, universities, put on uniform and went to fight. They are human beings, they have families, sometimes they can say something which is unacceptable or painful. We are a democracy, so people feel free to say something. This does not in any way reflect the code of conduct of our military and our security operations or the instructions of our commanders or the rule of law that is the basis for the operation of every soldier in our military.
If they have breached international laws...
By the way, people were investigated. People were investigated and are adjudicated and were arrested. And that can, unfortunately, things can happen. But this is not in any way reflective of what the Israeli Defense Forces are.
You answered my question there. So now, after 12 months of fighting, are Israeli citizens safer now than a year ago? Or has Israel essentially just created a new generation of enemies?
I wish that this new generation will see a better future. Now we have to focus on the day after. The real effort has to be on the day after. How do we change the fate and future of Gaza? The Gazan people, the people in Gaza Strip, deserve a better future as neighbors of ours, and we deserve a better future as their neighbors. It's possible, it's feasible, it requires leadership and bold steps forward. I trust, of course, that leaders in the region who've expressed their interest to be involved in the day after will be part of a major change, historical change, that will enable a real future of peace between us and our Palestinian neighbors.
Well, Mr. President, one thing that is marking this anniversary is what seems to be cracks in the alliance that Israel has in the West. And I wonder what you make of President Emmanuel Macron in France calling for an arms embargo against your country.
So I was disappointed by this comment by President Macron, who I have long-standing good relations with. I would expect leaders of the free world to understand that in many ways, we are fighting for the future of the free world. We are fighting against extreme forces that really, in my mind, do not represent what the real values of Islam are. We are fighting against an enemy that wants to reign over all the Middle East and move forward, and has aspirations, historical aspirations, also towards Europe and the United States. And we are here to block that, together with allies who understand that the future of the region is peace, coexistence, using the enormous resources of this region for the better of the world and doing good. It's feasible. Let me tell you something. I was a minister in the cabinet of Ariel Sharon in 2005, where we were, he came forward with the whole idea of getting out, that Israel will move out of the Gaza Strip. It was a very bold step. We uprooted settlements and settlers who were there 3 generations. We went to them and we told them we will rebuild a Hong Kong of the Middle East. That was the name of the whole idea, a Hong Kong of the Middle East. But unfortunately, as we moved out, Hamas came in with Iranian support, killed their cousins, brothers, and family members from Fatah, took over Gaza and turned it into an army base and a launching pad for terror against Israel and the region. This is the whole reality of the Middle East, meaning we have to be strong and tough together against this enemy and change the equation and direction of this region into a hopeful region.
Well, President Herzog, always so many questions, never enough time. I thank you so much for making the time for this interview. Thank you, sir. That was my conversation with the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog. I'll turn now to the perspective from Hamas and my conversation with its head of political and international relations, Dr. Basem Naim, who joined me from Doha. Dr. Basem, thank you very much for joining our show. Now, 1 year after the so-called Al-Aqsa flood operation on October the 7th, what did you set out to achieve, and how far have those actual objectives been realized?
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you and to your audience. I think Palestinians were suffering of a racist colonial occupation for 75 years, and Gazans in particular, added to this occupation, they were suffering of a 17 years suffocating siege. At the same time, for the last 2-3 years, there were declared plans from the Israeli government adopted, and finances and budgets were allocated to implement these plans, including the total control of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Judaization of Jerusalem, the annexation of the West Bank, and keeping Gaza separated. And then the final plan is to integrate Israel in the region without solving the Palestinian question. All these motivations were behind the step which we consider as an act of defense. Therefore, taking in consideration all these motivations, we think that we believe that we were able, if not to stop all these deteriorations in the Palestinian question, but at least to make it difficult, or to prevent it to be implemented as the Israelis see. Okay. Here I have to say that we are aware that it is not an easy task. and the prices could be very high, but we have no choice other than to stand up, to defend our cause, to defend our people, to defend our holy places. Otherwise, the plan was to wipe out totally the Palestinian question from the regional table and from the international arena.
Okay, so let me then ask you, what did you expect would be the reaction of the world to what was a very brutal attack on October the 7th?
Unfortunately, we are really disappointed from the response of the international community, especially the Western powers, to observe a daily genocide committed live on air with clear declaration from the Israeli side and clear intentions to commit a genocide and to keep silent and to allow the Israelis to blatantly violate the international law. I think this was disappointing. We were expecting that the international community will move to stop this genocide, to stop this aggression, and to move towards implementation of all international resolutions regarding the Palestinian question and giving the Palestinians their genuine rights of an independent state, an independent self-sovereign state, the right of return, and self-sovereignty.
Dr. Naim, according to reports, Hamas trained extensively for quite a while before the actual attack was launched, even a couple of years, with a number of other Palestinian armed factions. And I think 5 groups joined Hamas on October the 7th to launch the attack into Israel. How much influence did Hamas have on those other groups once that attack was launched? How much could they, control the behavior of the other groups?
Hamas is a Palestinian liberation movement, and yes, we have prepared ourselves for years for this act of defense because, again, we are people under occupation for 75 years. Palestinians have offered a hand for a political solution for decades, since 1993, after signing the Oslo Agreement. All these attempts to solve this conflict politically were undermined by the Israelis, and it was declared goal by Benjamin Netanyahu to sabotage this so-called political solution of the Palestinian question. Therefore, yes, we believe that it was no other choice than to stand up and to fight back and to resist the occupation. Based on this, we have called all other factions, including Fatah, to join us to join us for any action to defend our cause, to defend our people, to defend our holy places. Out of this wide arena of Palestinian factions, there are some Palestinian factions who joined this goal and who was part of these activities. And we believe that it is not about the influence of Hamas. It is more about that these factions strongly believe that this is the only way to bring the Palestinian cause back on the table, to knock the doors of this biggest open-air prison, especially in Gaza, and to get the attention or to draw the attention of the international community towards our just cause.
Now, Dr. Naim, when you say that, the Israelis are not looking for peace and that, you're looking to make peace yourselves, the argument that Israel keeps throwing back is that Hamas has stated very clearly that its goal is the elimination of Israel. So Israel can always throw that back at you and say, well, we can't have peace with a group that looks for our destruction.
First of all, Hamas has in 2017 stated or declared its position in its political document that we are ready if all Palestinians accept a state on 67 borders, an independent self-sovereign state on 67 borders with Jerusalem as a capital, and preserving the right of return. We are ready to cooperate, and we are not planning to hinder or to prevent such a political solution, and we will join this solution. This is on one side, but on one side, Hamas is talking loudly that we are for a political solution if it is feasible. On the other hand, you have to remember that 1996, in the first meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu as a prime minister and Yasser Arafat at that time, he declared his position that he is going to undermine the so-called two-state solution or political solution and sabotage any political vision. But what is more important, it is not about Hamas. It is more about the other side. I think we have witnessed a few months ago that Netanyahu in front of the UN General Assembly, this was in September before October 7th, and recently also in September 2024, he declared his position that between the river and the sea there will be no political entity except Israel, and he is planning not only to contain or to confine the conflict to the Palestinian issue, but he is planning to change the whole map of the Middle East. Therefore, again, it is not about the Palestinian position. PLO, which is representing the whole Palestinians, has taken a clear stance toward the conflict, but this was undermined. Yasser Arafat was assassinated. After that, the West Bank, 80%, I mean Area A, Area B, and Area C was annexed. Palestinians in East Jerusalem are expelled forcefully, as we witness every day. The holy places, I mean Al-Aqsa Mosque in particular, they are planning and they are declaring these goals. They are planning to control the mosque, to take it over, to destroy it. I can give you only one number, that between in 2023, 55,000 extremist Jews stormed the mosque, performed all prayers, and planned to enter the mosque and to change the status quo against international law and against the treaties between Israel and Jordan. Therefore, again, it is not about a political party on the Palestinian side. It is about the position of the other side, which is clear.
Understood. But Dr. Naim, what I'm saying is that if the argument that Israel always throws out is that Hamas cannot be a partner in peace because it's got a stated goal of destroying Israel, surely if Hamas officially says we do not have that goal of the elimination of Israel, that would change the dynamic and the relationship in terms of trying to achieve a peace.
Again, what should Hamas do more than to declare its official goal in its political document 2017 by talking about the acceptance of Hamas of a common ground between all Palestinians, which means if we have the chance to have a Palestinian state, an independent, self-sovereign state on 67 border with Jerusalem as a capital, preserving the right of return, that we will cooperate in this, we will be part of this. But again, on Gaza, you have Hamas, you have October 7th, you have the resistance. In the West Bank, you have the PLO leadership, you have the PA, the Palestinian National Authority. What is the situation on the other side? Annexation of the West Bank, Judaization of Jerusalem, more than 20,000 Palestinians killed between 2000 and 2023 on checkpoints in their own land, in their houses, burned by extremists. What is, again, on the other side, we have a Palestinian partner who is ready to go ahead for this solution.
So,
but what is the response from the Israeli side? Declaring...
sorry, Dr. Naim. I realize.
2017 or 18, he has declared... Yes.
No, sir, I know you've gone over those issues. I was really just looking to see if Hamas would officially make its position one which says we no longer look for the destruction of Israel, and then perhaps Israel has less of an argument against it. But let me ask you this. Did you believe that taking hostages would at least provide you more protection or, preserve the protection of the fighters against Israel's response? And perhaps that hasn't happened. The other thing is, obviously, there are families now arguing with the Israeli government for the return of their hostages. I spoke to one of them. They're desperate for news about the hostages. What information can you tell me about the condition of the remaining hostages after 1 year in captivity?
First of all, I want to reject this kind of arguments because it is part of the Israeli propaganda that we have captured Israelis in order to protect ourselves or our fighters. No, we have negotiated with the Israelis for years and years to get our freedom fighters, our heroes behind bars in Israeli jails, to get them free. Naim Barghouthi is now for more than 44 years in jail. And like Naim, there are a lot of Palestinian leaders and fighters behind Israeli jails, but we have failed. And the international community have also failed to help Palestinians to get their prisoners free. Therefore, the main goal of capturing Israelis, I'm talking about soldiers, is how to get our prisoners free. We have offered from day one, after October 7th, to have a serious prisoner exchange to release all prisoners, all captured Israelis, and to get all our prisoners free. But Israel, from day one, has rejected all these proposals and have declared 3 goals: to crush Hamas, to evacuate Gaza Strip from its people, and to retrieve the captured Israelis forcefully. Therefore, we have also accepted at least 2-3 times different proposals from the mediators, and each time these proposals, which was accepted publicly and praised by the mediators and by the Americans, was sabotaged by Netanyahu and his racist government, either by committing new massacres or assassination of the top negotiator, or by adding a new condition like what he has did in the last negotiated deal in July 2nd. We are ready to go for implementing this negotiated deal, which, by the way, this negotiated deal of July 2nd, the core of this negotiated deal is an Israeli paper which was adopted by Joe Biden, and we have welcomed this Joe Biden proposal. Then it has become the UN Security Council resolution, and we have also welcomed this. Therefore, we are ready to go immediately for solving the whole issue by going for implementation of this broker deal.
Okay. Dr. Naim, can I ask you just for an update on the condition of the current remaining hostages? What sort of state are they in? What sort of health, what sort of conditions are they being held in?
I have no details, but what I am sure of, that these captured Israelis are suffering like our people from the continuous Israeli bombardment. Few months ago, the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigade have clearly stated that at least 80 of these captured Israelis were killed by Israeli bombardment, and this was also emphasized or confirmed by all those Israeli prisoners released along the last few months, that most of the time they were scared not by the guards from Al-Qassam, but mainly by the Israeli bombardment, or to be shot directly by Israeli soldiers, like what happened in Shijaiya neighborhood or in Nusayrat by the attempt to rescue some of the captured Israelis. They have rescued 4, but at the same time they have killed 3 others and killed more than 250 Palestinians. Therefore, I cannot give you now, because of the very complicated situation on the ground. They are in different areas by different groups, exact numbers and exact or details about their situation now on the ground.
12 months on, it's obviously not only the Israelis who suffered. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, more than 100,000 injured in the Israeli response, which the attack from Hamas provoked. And much of Gaza is now reduced to rubble, more than 70% of the buildings reduced to rubble. So while you've refocused the world's attention on the plight of the Palestinians, haven't you also now contributed more to their suffering through that action?
First of all, it was not provoked by Hamas. We were provoked for 76 7 years by an Israeli, a racist Israeli occupation. We were for 17 years by suffering of a suffocating siege. By the way, Palestinians along the 75 years or along the 57 years after 1967 occupation, they were not enjoying peace and prosperity and security. We were killed on a daily basis. We were our economy were totally undermined. We were suffering, especially I am a Gazan. I left Gaza a few days before October 7th. And I was the Minister of Health. We were denied food and medicine and electricity, freedom of travel, including patients who were seeking to leave Gaza Strip for treatment abroad. Therefore, we haven't provoked anyone. We stand up to fight back, to open the doors of this biggest open-air browser, as even some Israelis have described. Second, do you believe that we should be accused for all what has happened along this year because someone on the other side have decided to go against international law and international humanitarian law and to smash not only the Palestinian but also international humanitarian law under the Israeli bulldozers? I don't think that ICJ, the International Justice Court, have described what's happening there as a genocide to accuse Palestinians of this. If you decide to commit a genocide, I think this is not the fault or the mistake of the victim, that he was accidentally or he was there and he was attacked by the enemy. Again, we stand up to defend ourselves, to defend our family, to defend the future of our children, to defend our holy places and the future of our just cause. Yes, we know that we have paid a lot of price, but this is because of the failure of the international community to secure a just cause for the Palestinian question. This is the crime of the Israeli side, who have publicly declared their goals to, once one of them have called to throw an atomic bomb against the Palestinians. I don't think that this is the fault of Palestinians when someone decide to do it. Again, what we still consider it a political conflict. We are looking for a political solution. From day one, we have handed over to the mediators and to the Americans and other countries that we have a roadmap of 3 phases. Phase 1 is to stop this aggression, to reach a deal of prisoner exchange, and to rebuild Gaza or to resuscitate the people inside Gaza Strip, to go for a Palestinian unity, to form a Palestinian national unity government representing all Palestinians, and thirdly, to go for a political solution based on the international law and international resolution toward the Palestinian cause. I think from day one, we were ready to go for a political solution. But again, because of the complicit of the international community, mainly in the West, in particular the Americans, who have supplied the Israelis along these months by hundreds of thousands of tons of explosive materials and weapons, by billions of dollars, by by giving them or securing them a political umbrella, using the veto at least 4 times in the Security Council. And in parallel to this, they talk about an attempt to reach a ceasefire, but all the time they were sure that Netanyahu is not planning at any time to reach a ceasefire.
Well, the complication, Dr. Naim, of course, is that, as you stated, one of the intentions that Israel has made very clear is it wants to wipe out Hamas completely. How close are they, having taken key people out, people like Ismail Haniyeh, who's moderating for peace, how close is Hamas to being totally wiped out as a fighting force?
First of all, today, unfortunately, the international media, mainly mainstream media, they portray this conflict as if it is between Hamas and Israel. It is not between Hamas and Israel. It is between Palestinians who are fighting now for more than 100 years for their dignity and freedom, and the colonial occupation. Now they have the problem with Hamas. 20 years ago it was with Fatah. 40, 50 years ago it was with the PFLP. Therefore, it is not about Hamas. They can crush Hamas. They can smash Hamas if they are able to do it. But again, they will face the same problem in 10, 15 years because they will create a new generation of Palestinians who are more committed to fight and to struggle for their freedom and dignity and to secure a better future for our children. How much they are near to reach this goal, I think he has used all what he can, especially at the beginning, to crush Hamas and to crush the resistance and to kick out Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. After 1 year, we can see that Hamas is still fighting. Hamas is still in control and command. Hamas fighters on the ground are in a very good shape. Maybe you have watched, and the audience have watched, a video of a very complicated military operation in the eastern part of Rafah, near the borders, where Hamas fighters were able to attack Israeli bulldozers and Israeli Merkava tanks and to kill a lot of Israeli and wound a lot of Israeli soldiers. I am talking about an area which is totally controlled on the ground, from the sea and from the air, by the Israelis now for at least 4 or 5 months. Again, Hamas is still in a very good shape, and all other factions who are participating in this resistance are in a very good shape. They are still in control and command, and I'm sure after 1 year, Israel has failed to achieve any of its 3 declared goals.
If Hamas's total elimination is part of the mission of Israel, how much in danger are you? You're a member of Hamas. Is your life threatened?
Look, anyone who is standing up to fight against such a colonial, very aggressive, very brutal enemy, to fight for freedom and dignity of his own people, he has to keep in mind and to put in his calculation that this was one of the scenarios. We are praying for Allah for years to end our life as martyrs and freedom on this path of this noble path. Therefore, yes, this is a chance. But at the end, the decision how my life will be ended and when it will be ended, this is the decision of Allah. It is not by Netanyahu or his government. But if it will happen, again, this is part of our calculations. And I have to tell you and the audience that if you study all the assassinations along the 40 years of Hamas life, each time Hamas, after the assassination of some of its leaders, starting by Sheikh Yassin and Dr. Rantisi, each time Hamas become more and more stronger. Hamas in 1987 started by throwing stones. Today Hamas is able to knock down Merkava 4 and to sniper Israeli, very, very sophisticated Israeli soldiers. Therefore, Hamas always become more stronger after assassinating its leaders.
Dr. Naim, how encouraged are you by what seems to be cracks in the relationship between the Western allies of Israel and Israel's leadership? It seems, for example, President Macron of France calling for embargo of weapons, and other countries also expressing concern that there may be something of a gap now between the Israelis and their allies. How does that encourage you, or how do you regard that?
We observe all these declarations and steps as a positive step in the right direction. But at the end, we believe that all these declarations are tactical declarations. But when it comes to the strategic issue of this conflict, there is no gaps and there is no dispute between the Israelis and their allies in the West. We can take it very serious, or we can take it serious, I mean such steps, if we see the Western allies go to the Security Council to implement the international resolutions regarding the ceasefire agreement, regarding the reunification of the Palestinian territories, to undermine all these settlements activities, and finally to give the Palestinians their own genuine rights of an independent, self-sovereign state, and to guarantee the right of return for all Palestinians who were displaced forcefully in 1948 by the Israelis. Therefore, it is a tactical move, but when it comes to the core issues, when it comes to the strategic questions of this colonial occupation, we don't see a serious gap or a serious dispute between the two parties.
So what impact has Israel's focus on Hezbollah and its actions in Beirut and Lebanon in general? What impact has that had on what's happening with Hamas and its confrontation with Israel?
I think this has impact on two levels. One, they have attacked Hamas now for the last few months. They have attacked Hezbollah for the last few months in order to disengage Hezbollah from supporting Hamas or the resistance in the Gaza Strip, to make it easier for them to isolate the resistance in Gaza and to isolate the Gaza Strip and to give them more chance to crush Hamas or the resistance to reach their declared goals. But they have failed up to the last moment before assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he said clearly in his last speech that we are going to continue our unwavering support for the resistance in Gaza, and a ceasefire agreement has to start first in Gaza Strip.
Okay.
On the other level, I have to say that these are plans hidden now, or declared, not hidden, for years by the Israelis, that they are planning to attack Hezbollah. They are calling Hezbollah to move northern of Litani River and to disarm the Hezbollah inside Lebanon. I think this is Netanyahu, as I said earlier, he declared these goals in front of the UN General Assembly. He is going to change the maps of the Mediterranean, of the Middle East. It is not only about Lebanon. In maybe in few days or weeks, we might see the same thing in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran.
Yeah. Dr. Naim, as we're almost out of time, I do want to just touch as a final thought on what you believe. You've talked about the right of return and the 67 borders and so on, but what are the red lines for Hamas on any post-war settlement with the Israelis? What are the absolute no-nos that you won't allow?
You are talking about the current conflict, or generally about the conflict?
Right now, what's going on right now? If this conflict was to end, what are the red lines that you are setting to say we will not negotiate unless these particular issues are met for this current conflict?
We are committed to the UN Security Council resolutions, which is clearly talking about permanent ceasefire, total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, no geographical or demographic changes inside the Gaza Strip, and lifting the siege and rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. These main elements are not negotiable.
All right, Dr. Basem Naim, thank you very much for your time, sir. And that's all from this special edition of the show. I'm Riz Khan, from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. On the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, Israelis hold memorials to honor the victims of the deadly assault as Hamas targets Tel Aviv with rockets. At least 9 Palestinian children are among the 17 people killed after the Israeli military orders civilians to flee Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza before carrying out strikes. And Israel continues its bombardment of the Lebanese capital as Hezbollah targets Haifa. Hello and welcome. On the one-year anniversary of the deadly October 7th attacks, Hamas has escalated tensions by launching a significant volley of rockets aimed at Tel Aviv. This came as Israelis across the country held memorials to honour and mourn the victims of last year's deadly assault. Well, the Hamas-led attacks of the 7th of October resulted in the deaths of 1,139 people and the abduction of 250 others, of whom 100 are still thought to be in Gaza. Well, families of those who were abducted and killed at the Supernova Festival in Israel gathered at the site of that attack to remember their loved ones today. Well, journalist Noga Tarnopolsky joins us now from Jerusalem. Noga, thank you very much for speaking to us once again here. Just tell us how today's somber anniversary has been marked there.
Well, it's a very grim day. More than 130 rockets have landed in Israel at the same time that, as you said, people are gathered in hundreds of different ceremonies. Some are neighborhood ceremonies, some are, for example, at the Nova Festival or at various different communities that were ravaged. And the largest ceremony is underway right now as we speak in Tel Aviv's Hayakon Park, with about 40,000 people present, which is a lot less than half of those who intended to go. But because of the security situation, the Israeli army limited the amount of people who could attend.
We've talked in recent months about how politically divided Israel has become. But in terms of today, would you say the country was entirely united in its sense of grief?
Absolutely not. I have to say, almost tragically not. There was a cabinet meeting today chaired by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it devolved into kind of almost just embarrassing attacks back and forth from the national military leadership to ministers. The Prime Minister proposed giving this war, which Israelis just call the October 7th War, a grandiose new name, the War of Resurrection, as if that would change anything. The minister in charge of the official ceremony, which is just a pre-taped kind of event with no public present, asked to change the name of her ceremony to make it sound grander. And it's just been a very, I would say, heartbreaking day of, I would say, the bulk of the Israeli people feeling not represented by the government that represents them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the war of resurrection, ask you what you think Prime Minister Netanyahu meant by that. He went on to say that the situation now is changing the security reality in our region for the sake of our children, for the sake of our future, to ensure that what happened on the 7th of October is never going to happen again. Is there a feeling that he's achieving or achieved any of that during the last 12 months?
There isn't. And it's a great question because it's a remarkable reality here in Israel. You know, the last 2 weeks or so have actually seen some very important tactical successes for the Israeli army, with the elimination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and other hits against Hezbollah. And yet Israelis, 70%, according to the latest polls, fear more for their security, do not feel safe. And there's a sense that, for example, with the Prime Minister's effort to give the war a grand name, he's trying to make believe that the horrors of October 7th didn't actually happen and that the insecurity, the ongoing insecurity of Israelis isn't taking place. I'll give you a clear example. The more or less 100,000 Israelis who were evacuated from the north of Israel, next to the border with Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been lobbing missiles since October 8th, they have no path back home, despite these tactical successes. So they are feeling a sort of ongoing desperation, and the mood of the country reflects that.
Yeah, and all the while, lots of speculation about how Israel might respond to last Tuesday's ballistic missile attack that was carried out by Iran. What are people expecting in terms of timing and also the nature of the counterattack? Or do you think perhaps people just aren't talking about it because today is, of course, the 7th of October?
I think that if we're talking about people with government connections, there is a lot of speculation here in Jerusalem. I think if we're talking about average Israelis, they just have no idea. And the government intentionally is not communicating with them. It's not just a matter of kind of the fog of war, and what the Israeli army spokesman clearly says is that they don't want to communicate any important information to the enemy. It's also a matter of a government that appears not to have a clear strategy. And so Israelis are left trying to pick up hints from foreign media reports. For example, CNN just reported in the last hour that Israeli officials have told American officials that they're determined to try and go after one of Iran's nuclear facilities. But again, even when that news is transmitted to Israelis, it's not in the context of any known endpoint or any actual strategy or any clear aim that the government is attempting to achieve through these actions.
Yeah, we've heard that quite a bit on this channel. We've had a number of analysts saying, you know, Israel's got the tactics, but where's the strategy? Just going back to today's commemoration, so it was on this day last year at exactly 6:29 a.m. that those Hamas attacks began. What's been happening, if anything, in Gaza to commemorate this first anniversary of what's been a hellish 12 months for them as well?
That's right. Today was another hellish day, or a repetition of hellish days for Gazans. Israel launched pretty heavy attacks in Gaza today. And, you know, what the Israeli army explains is that they're doing so against efforts by Hamas to regroup, which seem to be true. For Gazans, I think at this point, it doesn't matter. And to my knowledge, there weren't any actual commemorations. I'm not sure that in Gaza there was the space to organize any real events. But again, part of the reason that Israelis feel insecurity is that Hamas, after a year of being pounded by what's considered one of the most powerful armies of the Middle East, is able to regroup and reassert itself. It too launched rockets into Israel today. And there are a lot of questions about the Israeli government's no, no, and no. In other words, not wanting the Palestinian Authority to rule in the future in Gaza, not wanting even a joint Arab force there. And so there are questions of, you know, here as internationally wondering, what do you want if this is no and that is no? And there's a fear that Hamas can regroup because of Israel dithering in this way.
And is there any update on the situation regarding Yahya Sinwar? Anything we're hearing with regards to him?
Well, Al Arabiya had an important scoop in this respect this evening, saying that he is alive and after a few weeks of being AWOL, has actually made contact with other Hamas officials in Qatar. What I heard just minutes ago from the Israeli news site Walla News is an Israeli, anonymous, but an Israeli source confirming that, in fact, the understanding is that Sinwar is alive and back in touch with the mediators.
Okay, yes, indeed, that's what we've been hearing. Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest there. Journalist Noga Tarnopolsky in Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Described by the Israeli president as the country's darkest hour, the events of the 7th of October shook the nation of almost 10 million people to the core and sparked a conflict that continues to reverberate right across the region. Well, as Israel commemorates the first anniversary of the Hamas attacks, our very own Trent Murray takes a look back at the fateful day and the 12 months of war that have followed.
October 7th, 2023, 6:30 a.m. the first sirens sound across Jerusalem. Hamas unleashes a barrage of more than 2,000 missiles towards Israel. The warnings quickly spread to Ashkelon, Ashdod and Tel Aviv. Armed militants breach Gaza's perimeter fence, fanning out to nearby Israeli towns and villages. Local security forces are caught unprepared, and more than 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, are killed in the dark hours that follow. Hamas terrorists have waged the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in fighting rounds, but at war.
Over 250 Israeli hostages are taken back into Gaza by the militants. Their desperate families watch anxiously as the IDF mobilizes to respond to the attack. Israeli fighter jets quickly begin to launch retaliatory strikes in Gaza as tanks and troops mass on the border.
We are afraid. We left afraid. I swear I cannot walk. I cannot walk one step, but we are afraid. May God protect them and us.
The IDF intensifies its attack on Gaza, striking what it says are Hamas targets in the Strip. As the death toll quickly climbs into the thousands, Israeli tanks pour into Gaza on October 28. Intense fighting and aerial bombardment continue until November 22, when the Israeli cabinet approves a temporary ceasefire in return for hostages. 105 captives are released over the 4-day truce, but the ceasefire collapses and the bombing begins again. Over the 12 months of Israeli bombardment, over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, according to the health ministry. It's a scale of killing which has shocked the world. Protests calling for a ceasefire spread, and away from Gaza, Israel's military responds with force against members of the self-described Axis of Resistance, assassinating Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Hezbollah General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, and senior IRGC officers in Damascus. The United Nations calls for calm.
The raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno.
Large-scale attacks spread to Lebanon in September as Israel targets Hezbollah. Bombs hit the capital and Israeli troops cross into southern Lebanon. A response, the IDF says, to more than 8,500 rocket attacks since October 8. But even after 12 months of death and destruction, worries remain that more may be yet to come. In the wake of the most recent Iranian missile attack, even 12 months on from October 7, the road ahead shows little sign of an off-ramp to de-escalate the tensions which are simmering across the Middle East. Trent Murray in Tel Aviv for Al Arabiya News.
Trent Murray reporting there. Well, let's get some more analysis now with Khaled Elgindy, who is a Senior Fellow and Director of the Programme on Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli Affairs at the Middle East Institute. You're also the author of the book Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. Thank you so much for speaking to us. 365 days have passed since the Hamas attacks. In your view, is Israel a safer country than it was 12 months ago?
I don't think so. I'm sure if you ask Israelis, they probably would say that they're not safer today than they were on October 6th, let's say, of 2023. And that's certainly true of the region as a whole. The region is more violent, more unstable, and closer to all-out regional war than at any time in recent memory. So I think there is a real fear about what comes next.
Indeed, and we were just talking about that with a correspondent on the ground in Jerusalem. This broader regional conflict would obviously, wouldn't it, pose a real threat to the US interests in the regions, and also by extension Israel having a great deal of anger in its backyard.
Oh, absolutely. And I think just as as we heard from the previous guest, there really isn't much thinking as far as strategic vision for what comes next. I mean, the Israelis are masters of tactics, as we heard, but give very little thought to the day after or even the next day. So here we are with Gaza in ruins, 42,000 people at least killed, massive collective trauma inflicted on Palestinians as a whole, starvation as a result of Israeli policies, the destruction of most of Gaza's infrastructure. It's hard to imagine how anyone, any sort of right-minded person would imagine that anything good could come out of this scale of human misery and destruction.
And it really feels, doesn't it, like diplomacy has completely failed for us to be where we are with, let's face it, there hasn't been anything resembling a truce or a ceasefire in Gaza at any rate since November of last year, has there?
That's right. I mean, there's been virtually no pause in the bombing campaign, in the attacks on everything in Gaza. I mean, there's nothing that is safe. Just over the weekend, we saw yet another shelter that was bombed in an area that was supposed to be a safe zone by Israel. So there's really nothing and no one that is safe. And it is, I think, a massive diplomatic failure. I think it is a political failure, certainly on the part of extremists on both sides, Hamas and the Israeli government, but also on the part of the United States, which also doesn't really have a plan for the day after and does not really have a vision beyond its unconditional support and standing by Israel. They have, I think, what we've seen over the last year is the administration's been very frustrated, but they've been totally unwilling to translate that frustration into any meaningful pressure on Israel. And so here we are, a full year into this horror that is spreading with no end in sight.
Okay, so a failure on the part of the United States and US diplomacy here. But I think you've been, if I'm not mistaken, you've been critical of the Palestinian leadership as well, describing them in the August edition of Foreign Affairs as impotent and irrelevant. Well, at least that's how you describe Mahmoud Abbas and his leadership. Where have they been, and why haven't they played a more significant role in trying to lobby their friends around the world?
Well, because they don't really have any leverage. They're not in control of ceasefire talks, so they have nothing to do with the actual war itself. They are themselves under enormous pressure from the Israeli army. In the past several weeks, Israel has mounted a massive military crackdown on the population, particularly in the northern part of the West Bank. And so, once again, the Palestinian Authority has shown itself to be kind of irrelevant, and those kinds of things undercut their credibility, which is already quite low among ordinary Palestinians. So they're not able to affect events on the ground in Gaza in the diplomatic realm, and they're also really not able to confront the challenges facing Palestinians even in their own backyard in the West Bank.
And presumably where you are in the United States, all of this is looming pretty large over the forthcoming elections, which are just a month away now. Would you say, on the whole, this has been more damaging for the Democrats than it's likely to be for Donald Trump? I.e., has this played into Donald Trump's hands, this whole situation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, the party that is in power, the party that is in control, will be blamed for any successes or failures. And this has been a resounding diplomatic, political, moral failure on the part of this administration. And there's no question that it will probably hurt Kamala Harris's chances, particularly in key states where there are large Arab American communities, like Michigan. Whether it's enough to actually make a difference in the outcome of the election, that remains to be seen. But there's no doubt that there's an enormous gap between where the Biden and Harris administration and the party leadership are on this issue and where the rank and file membership of ordinary Democrats more broadly are on this issue. Most people who identify as Democrats in the United States would like to see more pressure on Israel, would like to see a cutoff of weapons used to kill Palestinians. But that's not at all where the Democratic Party is, either in terms of the donor class or the decision makers. It's certainly not where President Biden is. And so, again, it's hard to know exactly what that gap will mean. Most people don't vote on the basis of foreign policy, but there is a segment of the electorate, particularly the Arab American and American Muslim communities, who say by pretty wide margins. I think I saw a poll by the Arab American Institute, 81% of Arab Americans say that Gaza is a primary issue in their decision of who to vote for in November.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. We're out of time, I'm afraid. Khaled Elgindy, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we can speak now to Daniel Lifshitz, who joins us now from Tel Aviv. Daniel, you're the grandson of the hostage Oded Lifshitz, and your grandfather has been held now for exactly 1 year. He's 84 years old. Today must be a really painful day for you and your family, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not only me and my family, it's my community of Kibbutz Nir Oz. It's a community of people who all their life cherish for peace activism, for the coexistence, for doing everything for humanity. That's kind of a person is my grandfather. And I tell you the truth, I could never, ever imagine an 84 years old great-grandfather, he's the only great-grandfather held hostage in the world, will be held by Hamas, ISIS in Gaza for a year. I mean, I never imagined who will kidnap such an old people, but a year in Gaza, I never believed we'd get there.
Your grandfather was a journalist, I believe. Tell us a little bit more about him, because the Palestinian cause was very close to his heart, wasn't it?
Absolutely. First of all, he founded the kibbutz in 1957. And after that, he had very good relationships all the years with the Palestinians, which are just a mile in front of the kibbutz, mile away. He was a journalist. He was the first Israeli journalist to interview Yasser Arafat. And actually, his biggest activity was that in 1984, he came to Gaza with Latif Dori to Rashad Ashawa, the leader at that time, to tell them, you have to focus on education. My grandfather for 20 years worked that they will focus on education because he said Oslo agreements are fine. The connection with Yasser Arafat is important, but education is the basic thing. And after Hamas took the leadership in Gaza, it was really a huge breakout for him because he couldn't go there anymore. And the only thing that he did since then was to take sick Gazans to the hospitals in Israel to get chemotherapy and bring them back there. That was this kind of man, you know, he's a man of justice, so doing the right thing. And he really tried to do everything that these two nations can be together, but also he all the time warned that the enemy of the Middle East is Hamas, all the time. And unfortunately, he was right.
And he was actually helping people from Gaza at the very moment he was abducted, wasn't he? Tell us a bit about the circumstances of his abduction, Daniel.
So actually on October 7 at 8:15 in the morning, they were the first ones to be kidnapped, my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather stood up. He closed the bomb shelter door. He was holding the handle. He told my grandmother, Yochke, I'm afraid there is war. And then 5 Hamas terrorists breached their home. They shot 5 bullets on their door. They opened it. He got injured in his hand. They took my grandmother out of bed. They rolled her in a carpet and put her on a bike while my grandfather was dragged. And on the time that he was dragged, he was taken to he was just by the house, laying down there, and he was he faint because he had blood pressure issues, and then my grandmother thought that he died. My grandmother thought that he was murdered, and she thought that he murdered on October 7, but then we realized that it was not true because he was taken, and another hostage that saw him, she said that she saw him inside Gaza in a storage of fruits and vegetables, and on that place with the fruits and vegetables, he was on the table, bleeding with a white galabiya, and they took him for a treatment to take out a bullet out of his hand. Then 2 days after, she asked, what about him? They said that he's in an apartment in Gaza. And another hostage that came back in the first deal, she told us that my grandfather was with her for 30 days. He helped her. He changed diapers for her. He did everything for her in a place they didn't get any medicine, any medication at all. After 30 days, he fainted. She was handicapped. So she told the Hamas captives, you have to take me to another place. I can't be alone. And they took her to another place. And since then, we have no information about him because we have no one been released since then. And my grandfather, I mean, you know, a holy thing for the Quran, for the Judaism, for any kind of religion. The old men are so precious, and he is still there, which all his life believed in peace, and now a year. And I'm really devastated from that.
Well, we wish you and your family well, and of course we wish your grandfather, Oded Lifshitz, a prompt release. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Daniel Lifshitz, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Since last month, Israel has expanded its focus to include Lebanon, where the Israeli Air Force has conducted massive strikes on Hezbollah strongholds. Well, during the last 24 hours alone, there have been reports of extensive aerial bombardment across southern Lebanon and in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Well, for more, we can cross to Beirut and speak to Gareth Browne, who is the Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Gareth, Hezbollah fired an estimated 135 projectiles into Israel today. It was reported earlier as well that an Israeli strike had killed 10 Lebanese firefighters on the ground near the town of Barashit. Just tell us a little bit more about the situation on the ground there in Lebanon today.
Well, it seems to be escalating on an almost hourly basis, as you mentioned. Overnight late on Sunday, we had the 10 firefighters, rescue workers killed in an airstrike on a fire station in the south. And we've had this really what is an expansion of the war's geographical areas. We've seen an increasing number of strikes, not just in the southern suburbs of Beirut, but in other parts of Beirut too, and across the south. And I think, the most notable indication that the war is expanding is barely an hour ago, the IDF essentially issued warnings saying it was going to launch operations off the coast of South Lebanon, and it's warned, locals to stay away from the coast, stay away from the beach, up to the Awali River just south of Saida, which essentially cuts off about a third of the country from the rest of Lebanon. So every day, every hour that passes, this war is expanding geographically. The strikes are becoming more intense. We're seeing more people killed now, well over 2,000 people dead. So, for all Israel's talk of a limited incursion, a limited ground invasion, that's not really how it feels in Beirut.
Yeah, a lot of people will be feeling that. Excuse me. There was a strike on a village just outside Beirut on Sunday. 7 people were killed, including 3 children. I think it was in the town by the name of Kamatie. That must really raise fears, doesn't it, about how targeted these strikes really are?
I think this is a fear you hear from a lot of Lebanese. Some will use the term the Gazification of the war here, and you do see an increasing number of strikes killing civilians. That, you know, there's no way around it. That's the reality. You know, I think, you know, if you go back a few weeks, we obviously were in what seemed like a different aerial campaign, and that was very targeted and very precise. Obviously, the strike that took out Hassan Nasrallah was the most notable example. But on an almost daily basis, Israel was taking out very senior Hezbollah commanders and officials. And now it seems as they go down the target list, as they strike people off, some of the targets are more questionable. You know, we've had strikes on medical centers, the strike on that fire station in the south I just mentioned earlier. So this is a question that the Lebanese are asking themselves, and what can they do about it? It's not clear. I think we're probably likely to see, you know, a greater displacement of people in the coming days and weeks, especially if the IDF continues to issue these statements saying, you know, get out of this area, we're about to attack, as they've just done with the coast south of Saida. So I think if you're a Lebanese, this war is going in all the wrong directions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you mentioned Hassan Nasrallah is dead. We've known he's been dead for more than a week now. And yet Hezbollah, without a leader, it would appear, is continuing to function undeterred. I mean, who is calling the shots? Do we know?
We don't know for sure. I mean, this was always one of Hezbollah's strengths, right? It's secrecy, it's discipline. Clearly, Hassan Nasrallah has built a system which is going to outlive him. You know, think of the equivalent of the civil service. If you killed the head of the civil service, you know, the state would largely keep functioning. I don't think Hezbollah are in a rush to name a successor, a new secretary general. And they've essentially said that, you know, the movement is being run effectively by committee. You know, what remains of the leadership is running it in coordination with one another. I don't think there's any rush to name a new secretary general. I mean, the obvious issue there is if you name a successor and they are taken out, you know, then that asks serious questions. You know, it could be weeks, even months before we see a new Secretary General of Hezbollah named. And you know, we haven't had Nasrallah's funeral as well, which is going to be a very important moment, not just for Hezbollah, but for all of Lebanon. It will be a big moment of mourning. It'll likely be a huge public demonstration. Now, for obvious reasons, because of the war, because of Israel's aerial campaign, that's not possible at the minute. And, Hezbollah sources have said that Nasrallah has essentially been temporarily buried in secret. So I think Hezbollah are abiding their time. But what we see now is in the south, in the southern villages, Hezbollah's fighters are putting up quite a fierce fight. Some of the firefights are really quite tremendous. And we're seeing an organization that for now is outliving the charismatic Nasrallah.
And in terms of diplomacy and what's happening behind the scenes with a view to either brokering a ceasefire or bringing about an end to this aspect of Israel's war. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot was in Israel today, and just looking and listening to what's coming out of Paris, I mean, it does feel, doesn't it, like France is sort of forging its own diplomatic path and slightly going it alone from the rest of the international community.
Yeah, I don't think that's particularly new. I mean, I think when it comes to Lebanon, France has quite a distinguished history here, and I think the French knowledge of Lebanon is probably better than most other Western states. And you have seen, I think, over the last year or so, this almost a rivalry. You had the US peace efforts, which were, being driven by Amos Hochstein, President Biden's energy advisor. And then you had this French effort, and they were similar, but they were not exactly the same, and they were not exactly aligned. And I think you've seen, especially since, the pager attack here in Beirut a few weeks ago and Nasrallah's assassination, this pretense of US-led diplomacy has really started to fall away. And perhaps there is opportunity. I mean, I think the French feel capable, and they feel like they have a responsibility to Lebanon. And they also have close links to Israel, to the Israelis. So I think there is an opportunity for French diplomacy. But generally speaking, I think if you look at how the war is expanding, you feel the atmosphere in Beirut. Nobody is pinning their hopes on a diplomatic solution here. It feels very, very far away from the reality on the ground. That doesn't mean it might not come up with something, but I think if you're a Lebanese on the streets of Beirut, you're not holding your breath, waiting to see if this French diplomacy is going to deliver anything.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm told. Gareth Browne, Middle East correspondent for The Economist, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Let's get a reminder of our stories here on Al Arabiya News. Marking the first anniversary of the 7th of October attacks, the US President Joe Biden today condemned what he called the unspeakable brutality of what happened. He said he remains committed to Israel's right to defend itself. His Vice President Kamala Harris, meanwhile, added to the statement expressing heartbreak over the scale of death and destruction in Gaza during the past year. According to a report, the US has spent a record amount on military aid to Israel during the past year. The report from Browne University says Washington's expenditure of at least $17.9 billion has led to what it called an escalating conflict around the Middle East. And the Wall Street Journal says the Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, who was released by the US as part of a prisoner swap 2 years ago, is now back in the arms trade. Well, the newspaper reported that he's been trying to broker the sale of weapons to Yemen's Houthi militants, but the Kremlin has called that story fake news. Just before we leave you, the headlines here on Al Arabiya News. On the one-year anniversary of the 7th of October attacks, memorials have been held to honour the victims of that deadly assault. This as Hamas targets Tel Aviv with rockets. At least 9 Palestinian children are known to be among the 17 people killed after the Israeli military ordered civilians to flee the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza before carrying out airstrikes. And Israel has continued its bombardment of the Lebanese capital. This says Hezbollah has targeted Haifa. That is all we have time for. Thank you for watching. See you very soon here on Al Arabiya News.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood, coming up on the show. On the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, Hamas launches a barrage of rockets at Tel Aviv, while Israelis hold memorials to mourn the victims of the deadly assault. I speak to some of the family members of those lost in the attacks. At least 9 Palestinian children are among 17 people killed after the Israeli military orders civilians to flee Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza and begins heavy bombardment. And large explosions shake southern Beirut as Israeli forces bombard the Lebanese capital, while at least 10 people are wounded in Haifa from a Hezbollah rocket attack. Welcome. On the one-year anniversary of the deadly October 7th attacks, Hamas escalated tensions by launching a significant volley of rockets aimed at Tel Aviv. This came as Israelis across the country held memorials to honour and mourn the victims of the previous year's brutal assault. The Hamas-led attacks on October 7th saw the deaths of 1,139 people and the abduction of more than 200 individuals, 100 or so who remain captive. Well, families of those who were killed and abducted at the Supernova Festival in Israel gathered at the site of the attack to remember their loved ones.
Today, it's a closure for me. I come from there, and this is area. It's the first time that I see, and in my imagination, I see all the guys run in the field, and I said, it's impossible. It's not real. And now, it's really afraid to come here, but I say to myself that if I were not to come, the Hamas will win.
Described by its president as Israel's darkest hour, the events of October 7th shaking the nation of almost 10 million people to its core and sparking a conflict that continues to reverberate across the region. As Israel commemorates the first anniversary of the Hamas attacks, Trent Murray looks back at that fateful day and the 12 months of war that have followed.
October 7th, 2023, 6:30 a.m. The first sirens sound across Jerusalem. Hamas unleashes a barrage of more than 2,000 missiles towards Israel. The warnings quickly spread to Ashkelon, Ashdod and Tel Aviv. Armed militants breach Gaza's perimeter fence, fanning out to nearby Israeli towns and villages. Local security forces are caught unprepared, and more than 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, are killed in the dark hours that follow. Hamas terrorists have waged the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in fighting rounds, but at war.
Over 250 Israeli hostages are taken back into Gaza by the militants. Their desperate families watch anxiously as the IDF mobilizes to respond to the attack. Israeli fighter jets quickly begin to launch retaliatory strikes in Gaza as tanks and troops mass on the border.
We are afraid. We left afraid. I swear I cannot walk. I cannot walk one step, but we are afraid. May God protect them and us.
The IDF intensifies its attack on Gaza, striking what it says are Hamas targets in the Strip. As the death toll quickly climbs into the thousands, Israeli tanks pour into Gaza on October 28. Intense fighting and aerial bombardment continue until November 22. When the Israeli cabinet approves a temporary ceasefire in return for hostages. 105 captives are released over the 4-day truce, but the ceasefire collapses and the bombing begins again. Over the 12 months of Israeli bombardment, over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, according to the health ministry. It's a scale of killing which has shocked the world. Protests calling for a ceasefire spread, and away from Gaza, Israel's military responds with force against members of the self-described Axis of Resistance, assassinating Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Hezbollah General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, and senior IRGC officers in Damascus. The United Nations calls for calm.
The raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno.
Large-scale attacks spread to Lebanon in September as Israel targets Hezbollah. Bombs hit the capital and Israeli troops cross into southern Lebanon. A response, the IDF says, to more than 8,500 rocket attacks since October 8. But even after 12 months of death and destruction, worries remain that more may be yet to come. In the wake of the most recent Iranian missile attack, even 12 months on from October 7, the road ahead shows little sign of an off-ramp to de-escalate the tensions which are simmering across the Middle East. Trent Murray in Tel Aviv for Al Arabiya News.
I'm joined now by Elana Kaminka, a peace activist whose son Yanai died when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. He would have been 21 this week. Thank you very much for making time for us, Elana, on a very, very difficult day for you. How have you been spending today?
We've been just taking it as a day of reflection internally with our family. I haven't felt that it's something that I want to experience with the greater public, so we're just spending it with family.
That's completely understandable, and to that end, we're very grateful that you've made time to speak to us. What leads you to continue speaking to the media and talking publicly about what happened?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions, especially abroad and within Israel and Palestine, about what's going on. People are very stuck in a certain narrative, and there's so much pain that this war has caused on both sides that people are focused on their own internal pain, and they can't see beyond that. They can't even think about how we're going to get out of this situation. And, in most cases, people are focused on the pain on one side, and there's enormous pain on both sides. And I try to use my own experiences to help people see that, because until we start seeing one another and each other's pain, we're never going to get out of this mess.
Yeah, you come at this from that compassionate perspective, and it appears you always have done with your family, with Yanai as well. I've read an article, an interview you gave previously to Time magazine, in which you talked about how, as a family, you worked together to understand the Palestinian perspective, and that was something that Yanai did as well. Have you managed to retain that sense of compassion throughout the past year?
To tell you the truth, I don't even, it's compassion, but it's more than compassion. Yanai was very analytical. He had amazing strategic thinking, and he also was had a very deep understanding of the psyche of people around him, and he was interested in the psyche of people around him because he believed that if you want to work with somebody and you want to achieve something with another person, the most important thing is to see them and to understand where they're coming from, because only then will you be able to solve anything together. And he approached any situation in life with that attitude. So with his own soldiers, he wrote about his leadership ethos, and he wrote that in order to be a leader, or his top value as a leader, was to love his soldiers and make them feel loved and cared for, because he believed that they would become better soldiers if they felt that someone could actually see them as individuals. And he worked very hard at that. I can tell you more about it. But on a national level as well, how can you find a solution to a complex problem if you don't understand where the other side is coming from? And that goes on in both directions. I find Palestinians who don't understand Israelis at all, and I see a lot of Israelis who don't understand Palestinians at all. And that's why we misinterpret each other's actions. And it helps mainly the most radical elements of society on both sides, like Hamas. And I think that the only way we can ever solve our problems is to work at understanding one another and to trying to connect to one another on a human level, especially among the people who are more moderate and are looking for a solution that allows us to live together in peace. And there are people like that on both sides. You said it's for compassion. Yes, there is an element of compassion, but it's also the only way. I have 3 other children. It's the only way I can see them having a future. Any other way leads to a dead end. And I don't want what happened to Yanai to happen to my other 3 children. And so I'm trying to understand my Palestinian neighbors, trying to understand their pain and where they come from is a way that I see, the only way I see to build a better future for the children that I have left.
And that is always what strikes me about the complexity of the situation between Israel, between Hezbollah, between Hamas, Iran, of course, in there as well. But the countries that are involved, we hear Netanyahu, for example, giving an address to the Lebanese people saying, my war is not with you, it is with Hezbollah. And it causes you to think, well, what are relations going to be like, neighbourly relations between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and the Palestinian people here onwards, once the conflict is over? And you're saying there that there are moderates in society, and that if you could have more education amongst the moderates, that you think that you can build those bridges, you can mend those neighbourly relations?
In October 7th set us back decades on that level, because again, there's some people experience so much pain. It's very hard for them to make that jump forward. I'm looking at my own people in Israel who saw their neighbors pulled out of bed and slaughtered in the communities around Gaza, whole families, parents, little children, infants taken to Gaza as hostages. It's very hard to convince somebody who's seen those things with their own eyes to all of a sudden now build trust with other Palestinians. It's definitely set us back. And for Palestinians, seeing the bombing and the destruction in Gaza, it creates enormous anger towards Israelis. And I think, and to bridge those gaps will be extremely difficult and take a very long time. I do want to create a difference between what's happening with Hezbollah and Iran and what's happening with Palestinians. Israel has a conflict, the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, that we live together in the same land. And we've been causing one another enormous pain for the last 100 years. And the only way for that pain to end is for us to learn how to live together in the land that we share. There are radicals on the Palestinian side, like Hamas, that chose the actions they chose on October 7th, who don't want Jews living at all in the land. They say it's not for Jews and Jews need to leave, and they expect 7 million Jewish people who live there, like myself, to disappear. That's not a realistic hope. And the radical elements in Israeli society, some of whom are sitting in Netanyahu's government, say the same thing about Palestinians. They think it's all for the Jews and that the 7 million Palestinians who live within that area are going to disappear. And I have news for both of sides. Nobody's going anywhere. We have to learn how to live together. It's very different than what's going on with Hezbollah and with Iran, because Hezbollah and Iran are external to Israel. They're not part of Israeli society, and they have other agendas, and I don't feel that I'm an expert enough on those agendas to speak to them. But again, it's not two peoples living together in the same land. It's an external group that is threatening Israel on a day-to-day basis. And so I see it as a different situation. We had the memorial for my son last Tuesday, and in the middle of the memorial for my son, we were hit by tons of rockets from Iran. And that in my mind is a completely different scenario than what's happening with Palestinians.
It's really interesting hearing you lay it out from your perspective like that, because obviously you have a long experience as a peace activist within Israel, and talking about the differentiation as you see it. But then talk to me about what that was like. And I'm sorry to make you relive the experience, or to ask you to be at the memorial for your son, and then to have that type of attack happening. What did it feel like at the time?
Like deja vu. Actually, the last time, we live in a small community west of Jerusalem, and so we haven't been a target of most of the attacks. And the last time, except for the April Iran attack, the last time we had an air raid siren in our town was during Yanai's funeral. And his funeral was on October 9th. It was a bit rainy, just like this last Tuesday was. We were still hearing air raid sirens. We were still being attacked. Nothing had changed. It felt completely like a deja vu, like a year hadn't passed from one day to the other. We're in the same situation, the same quagmire that no one knows how to get out of. And what makes me despair is that I feel that at least, actually on both sides, the people who are leading us are people who aren't looking out for the best interests of their peoples. I can assure you that Hamas was not looking out for the best interests of the Palestinian people when they when they committed the atrocities of October 7th. Their own people have suffered greatly since October 7th, and the Hamas are hiding in the tunnels and leaving civilians outside to die in the attacks. That's not looking out for the best interest of your people. Taking the aid that was received from Europe and from the US and using it to build tunnels and to buy missiles rather than building schools and infrastructure and hospitals and things that can benefit your people. That's not what the Palestinian people need. but on the Israeli side as well. I can tell you that I've lost all faith in Benjamin Netanyahu and his leadership. I think that somebody who's taken zero responsibility for the disaster of October 7th is somebody who can't continue to lead the country. He's motivated by his own self-preservation politically. And that's a disaster for Israel. He's made a partnership with the most radical elements of Israeli society, including convicted criminals like Itamar Ben-Gvir and messianic radicals like Smotrich and Halson Melech, who are people who are not using the same logical tools that most people use to analyze the situation. They're looking at it from messianic biblical terms, which, if that's not how you see the world, is not a relevant way to approach the situation. And Netanyahu has created a coalition with them and is allowing them to determine the agenda of what happens in Israel. And it's to the great detriment of the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. And both peoples deserve much better leadership who's actually looking out for their interests. And a good leadership that would be looking out for their interests would be working on starting some kind of a peace process. It won't be easy. It won't be easy. There's huge mistrust on both sides. The issues are extraordinarily complex. There's 100 years of hatred and anger to get over. There is no easy solution. We have to start working on it. We don't have any other choice. And unfortunately, both people like Yahya Sinwar and the current government in Israel are leading us in the wrong direction toward that goal.
Is there enough domestic unrest, or not unrest, but is there enough domestic pressure and criticism and pressure on Netanyahu and his cabinet, like the pressure you've just described to me? You're very clear on your position on the failures, as you see them, of his government. Do you feel that there are enough others that there will be a change?
Hard to say. First of all, I feel that on both sides, again, if I speak a lot to Palestinian friends as well, and it's almost like a mirror picture. You have the same exact phenomenon happening on both sides. Israelis who only read the Israeli press and the Israeli media don't have a full picture of what's going on, and Palestinians who only read Palestinian press and Palestinian media don't have a full picture of what's going on. So I'll speak to the Israeli side. For the average Israeli, we're still reliving October 7th. Every day you open the paper and you read another story of an atrocity that happened on October 7th, and I can guarantee you there's no shortage of them. You can read about, grandparents that were slaughtered in their beds, about a one-year-old baby who's still being missing in Gaza, the two redheaded boys who were taken and haven't been, the Bibas family, and haven't been returned. There's so many horrible, horrible stories about young people mowed down at the Nova Music Festival. And so if you're living in that reality, it doesn't make sense to move forward in any kind of diplomatic solution. And people are willing to kind of buy into the propaganda that's being sent out by Netanyahu's government. And I think that at least, even if they're angry at Netanyahu and want to hold him accountable, they feel that it's something that needs to be done after the war, that the war is somehow going to be finished. No one knows how. And that after the war is over, that's the appropriate time to hold Netanyahu accountable. On the Palestinian side, there's a lot of disbelief about what happened on October 7th. Palestinians who don't read English or Hebrew, a lot of them don't believe that the atrocities of October 7th really happened because they're not exposed to them in Palestinian media. And so they feel like it's all Israeli propaganda, and the only thing they see are the bombings in Gaza, which makes them very, very hesitant to move forward in any kind of process with Israel. I find that the people actually that have the best understanding of the situation are Palestinian citizens of Israel, because they tend to read both Arabic media and Hebrew media. And also, a lot of them were directly impacted by October 7th. There were many Palestinian citizens of Israel who were killed, taken hostage, have been internally displaced within Israel. So they know it's not propaganda. They know it's real. But many of them also have relatives in Gaza. So they're really seeing both sides and getting the most full picture. Whether there's enough actual pressure to create any kind of change with Netanyahu's government, I can't tell you I'm optimistic. Netanyahu is a master manipulator. He's always got the next spin in the press. He's always got another explanation about why his failures aren't really his failures. They're somebody else's fault. He's he's always got a new angle to present things, to put himself in good light. And unfortunately, and very, very sadly, many of my compatriots fall for that kind of logic. Not everybody. There's people out protesting still, but I don't know whether we're a majority, and certainly not among the people of his base, the ultra-Orthodox, the settlers, the people who are his guaranteed base. They certainly aren't willing to be critical of him and his decisions.
It's really interesting speaking to you because of your wealth of activism in the country, and also what you're seeking to do from a compassion point of view. And I just want to return that where we began the conversation, how you've raised your children, how you raised Yanai, the compassion that you try to instill and the understanding from both sides. One question I do want to ask, which I think is worth clarifying about Yanai, is, and I'm sort of anticipating how people will view the interview and a question they might have, is, as the son of an activist, a peace activist, he was serving in the civilian forces in the army when he was killed. Is that correct? And how did you reconcile that with the type of activism you raised him with?
I think that's something that's very hard for people who aren't living in Israel to understand, how people serve in the army. I know that sometimes can be a big issue for my Palestinian friends and neighbors as well. First of all, on a technical level, military service is compulsory for men and women. I also served in the army. Every Israeli at age 18 is expected to serve. And not only is it compulsory, as Israelis, we do live with a sense of threat. It's not a made-up threat. I spent a lot of time in the United States as a child. If you're living in the United States, you don't feel threatened by your neighbors, by Mexico and Canada. In Israel, you have neighbors surrounding you on all sides who have many times tried to wipe your country off the map. And so there's a sense that you need to have a way to protect yourself. Otherwise, you simply won't be alive in the future. I'm the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and I heard from my grandparents on a daily basis that during the Holocaust, no one came to save them, and that it's so important that Israel exists and that Israel have an army so we can protect ourselves and the next Holocaust won't happen. And most Israelis that I know feel that their service is protecting them, their lives. As far as Yanai is concerned, he definitely felt that way. And I can tell you that on October 7th, he wasn't sitting in the West Bank. He wasn't protecting a settlement. He was sitting in Israel proper. He was in a training base. His job was he was a search and rescue soldier. So his actual job was to help save civilians in times of crisis, like collapsed buildings, earthquakes. That was his training. And he was an officer that trained incoming recruits in that work. But on October 7th, Hamas militants crossed the border and they started mowing down civilians all around them indiscriminately. Yanai was at the base with his trainees. He and the other officers made the decision to send the trainees back into safety, and they ran to the front lines and took over all the guard posts around the base. And the first post that Yanai arrived at was facing the beach, and he encountered 20 civilians who'd been having a party on the beach on that night into the morning. And Hamas militants landed on the beach and in boats and started mowing down civilians, partygoers on the beach. And the first thing he did was take those partygoers into the base and protect them. They were sure they were going to die. Some of them wrote posts on Instagram about it afterwards. And they said Yanai came and he told them, "You're going to be okay. I'm going to protect you. No one's going to hurt you here." And they spoke about the feeling of relief that they experienced. And I think, and not only that, Yanai later went to another post where he fought off Hamas militants who were trying to enter the base. And the fact that he was able to hold them back protected the two civilian communities directly behind his base, two kibbutzes. And we saw what happened in other kibbutzes around Gaza where they didn't have that protection. Civilians were slaughtered in those communities. So for Yanai, that's what his service was. It was keeping his compatriots safe. It was making sure that terrorists who came into his country and, plowed down innocent civilians indiscriminately, face to face. They saw who they were shooting and they made the choice to shoot innocent civilians, that he was there to protect them. And I think that's how he saw his service. And that's the kind of service that he believed in and that we all believe in. I think it would be naive to think that Israel doesn't need an army, because there are very radical elements in our neighborhood, let's say, and we do need to have the ability to protect ourselves. That doesn't mean that everything that the army does is acceptable to us. I think it's most important to remember that the army it doesn't determine policy. The policy is determined by the government. The army implements the policy that's decided by the government. And unfortunately, the current government is creating policies that we really disagree with. And the army is only the implementing body. It's not the source of the problem.
And outside of his service, how will you remember Yanai?
So Yanai, first of all, he would have been very unhappy about me giving this interview. And I always start by apologizing to him because he was a very private person. He didn't like to talk about himself. He didn't like to put himself in the front. He was very interested in other people. And I think the way I like to remember him is spending a lot of time listening to other people. As a commander, he would spend his evenings going from post to post and just getting to know his soldiers, asking them about their homes, their families, their interests. And he invested so much time doing that he really didn't sleep. He told us that sleeping was psychological, it was unnecessary. And of course, that's ridiculous because he was a biological being. And the way he managed with his lack of sleep was drinking a lot of coffee. And when I speak to groups about Yanai, I always use the coffee as something very symbolic about him. And I can also invite your listeners to use his legacy with regards to coffee, because I know that coffee is such a strong element of cultures throughout the Middle East. When you drink coffee with somebody, you first of all, you offer to drink coffee with somebody, it's a way to connect with them. And Yanai was interested in those interpersonal connections and human connections. The Arabic coffee is dark, it's bitter, it has sludge on the bottom. And when you have a real conversation with another human being, it's not all polite, it's not all sweet. The real conversations can be bitter, they can be difficult, they can be dark. And I wasn't afraid to have those conversations with other people and to listen to people he didn't agree with. And so I remember him by inviting people who are different than me to sit down and have a cup of Arabic, Turkish coffee and just listen to them and listen to their pain, listen to where they're coming from, to try and understand them, and to drink the coffee together, to be with them in their bitterness, in their darkness, and recognize that every human being has those sides, and to look together for a way to find light within that darkness. To me, that's his legacy.
Ilana Kaminka, thank you very much for making time for us on this day.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by the former Deputy Prime Minister of Israel and Minister of Intelligence and Atomic Energy, Dan Meridor. Sir, thank you for making time. How have you been marking today?
Well, I'm here in Jerusalem and I'm listening to your questions. I have been marking today as the first year to this horrible attack on October 7th. Television in Israel shows stories of people, women, children who were kidnapped, who were murdered, who were raped, and the recordings on the telephone when they are calling, there's no reply. Memorable moment or day that might have changed our life.
What's it like in Jerusalem today? How safe are you feeling?
Well, Jerusalem goes on. Life is normal, except the fact that we still have a war on. And I don't want to get used to a war situation as if it's normal. We need to end this story as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the whole year it's not the end. I hope it's the beginning of the end. I don't yet see that coming.
Does it, I was going to ask that, does it feel like the beginning of the end? Because a year ago, if you were to say in a year...
I don't know. It's not clear to me how this is going to end. It's the Iranian attack on Israel, which was really unprecedented and with no reason. We haven't attacked them. They have attacked us twice. The first time we responded in a more symbolic way, not in full scale, thinking that this would indicate to them, don't do it again. And then they did it again, launching 181 ballistic missiles. I don't think ever in history there was such an attack by a country that we never attacked. They have supported the Hezbollah, who again are an organization that we haven't attacked. They joined there after the Hamas attack on us, and since then we have a multi-front conflict, bloody, and it's not good. All needs to be done to put an end to it as soon as possible.
Before we get to talking about how that happens, let's talk about, so let's clarify what you mean when you say that Iran fired the ballistic missiles at Israel with no reason and had never been attacked, because as you point out, Israel hadn't launched an attack on Iran. But Iran obviously saying they were doing so in support of Hezbollah, who they back in Lebanon, and understood Hezbollah have been firing missiles over the border into Israel. This is the cyclical situation we find ourselves in. But in terms of Iran launching the attack, was it not in response for Israel's actions against Hezbollah in the last fortnight?
Well, it's a strange situation. We haven't attacked Hezbollah, they have attacked us. We had nothing to do with Hezbollah. They attacked us in support of Hamas. So it's all developed, this cyclical thing did not start with us. It started with Hamas attacking us. And then we responded after this horrendous attack that killed over 1,000 people and kidnapped people and raped and maimed and whatnot. After that, we responded, and then the Hezbollah joined in with no excuse, but they want to help the Hamas organization. And then Iran helps Hezbollah. That's a unique story. You see, there is an asymmetry here. I don't want to go into details, but look at it. With the PLO, we had negotiations, we had agreements, Oslo. We tried to bring about full peace. We haven't succeeded. We did partly. With Egypt, we have peace. With Jordan, we have peace. With the Abraham Accords, the Gulf states, North African. Here comes a new axis of three countries or three organizations, Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. First of all, they don't speak politics. They have a religious justification. It's against religion that there will be a Jewish state. Second, they say that Israel should not exist. We never said about Iran that Iran shouldn't exist. Iran is a welcome member of the international community. Don't need us for this. But they say that we shouldn't exist. They openly say it. So does Hezbollah, and so does Hamas. Not a question of borders or refugees or Palestine or Jerusalem. No, Israel should not exist. This is a unique situation in the world. I don't know of any other country against which there is such a campaign, not only in rhetoric, but in fire. And we have to defend ourselves against multiple fronts, from Iran itself, from the Shiite groups in Syria that Iran conducts, from the Shiite groups in Iraq that Iran conducts, from Hezbollah that Iran armed, from Hamas that Iran arms, from Islamic Jihad, and from the Houthis in Yemen. This is a unique theater, and we find ourselves in the midst of all of that. And of course, we need to defend ourselves and need to hit back, not because we like war, but we like to live, you know.
What about comments today from Jordan's foreign minister, who was meeting with the caretaker prime minister in Lebanon, in Beirut, saying that the actions of Israel risks tipping the wider region of the Middle East into an abyss? What do you say to that?
I haven't heard him, but I would say on the issue, we haven't done it. We haven't started it. Are we supposed to be a sitting duck and let them all launch rocket attacks? Do nothing because the Middle East may go up in flames? It shouldn't go up in flames. The other countries who are siding with us, in fact, including the Kingdom of Jordan and others, are not happy with the Iranian initiative here, the Iranian domination and the Iranian hegemony, and the Iranian aggressive attack on a country that did nothing against them. This is unprecedented, and I don't see why we need to be the side that does what should we do. What is it that we should do to stop it? Not clear to me.
Does it, in that sense, with the position that Jordan's foreign minister is taking there, with the countries that surround you there in the Middle East, do you feel like you don't have any friends there with regards to Israel, and that your friends are actually much further away, thinking US?
No, I don't think so. I believe that in the last, 40 or 50 years, there was a very positive trend of Arab countries, one after the other, coming to terms with us and signing peace treaties with us. It all started in 1977 with President Sadat of Egypt and Prime Minister Begin of Israel. And the biggest, most powerful Arab country was in peace with us. Since then, not one Israeli or Egyptian was killed or any war in 50 years almost. It's a big thing. Then there was an attempt with Oslo that didn't succeed very well, but was in that direction. Then there was Jordan, Israel signing a peace treaty in 1994 between Prime Minister Rabin and King Hussein, Allah yarhamu, both of them. And then there was the Abraham Accords about 2-3 years ago. And there was a talk about Saudis and Emirates and others joining in. There was a very positive trend of having, I don't speak of love and friendship in terms of personal relationship, but politically there was a process of accepting all of us as a reality and trying to find common interests and trade and tourism, and things are going well. There was another axis, however, that did the opposite. They said, you won't be part of the Middle East. We will continue the struggle until you are out of the Middle East. And Iran does that, speaking again in God's name. They know what he wants and they act for him. So there's no compromise, it's God's word. And Hezbollah the same, and Hamas the same, Islamic Jihad. This is a dangerous situation of development, not only for Israel. You know that on the aim list of Hezbollah, there are many Arab countries who are not happy with the Iranian behavior, not less than we are not happy.
Several of the countries you mentioned there when you were talking about efforts to normalize relations or indeed support Israel in the past, or to have diplomatic processes for a peace solution. Several of them have come out in recent weeks and said they would no longer support Israel if a state of Palestine was not established. What do you make of that? Do you think we're going to move to a position where there could be a two-state solution?
Let me make one thing clear. I am not the government now. I'm, in fact, in opposition to the government. I'm out of office. So what I say is my position, not the government's position. I think there should be a two-state solution. I don't see any other reasonable way to end the conflict. It's hard for us and possibly for the other side. We think the whole land is ours. They think the whole land is theirs. And there is a need, a must, to divide it between the two peoples. We were close to it in several occasions. In the year 2000, I was at Camp David with Prime Minister Barak, President Clinton, and Yasser Arafat, the chairman of the Palestinian organization. And I thought we would be there, and Arafat said no. And Clinton put a finger at Arafat and said, why do you not say yes to this? Palestinian state was offered, even share in Jerusalem, and also other things could be resolved, and he rejected. Then later we tried again with Prime Minister Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, in 2008. And he was offered the same and maybe even more, and that there was no positive response on the other side. I still think, in spite of that, it's our interest to end this conflict with a two-state resolution. It may not be easy. There were questions that are very tough, like Jerusalem, like issues of the exact borderline, but it needs to be done if there's leadership on both sides. One other element here, even if the Israeli government of today would agree to what I say, and they don't, is there a partner? Who speaks for the Palestinians, Hamas or the PLO? If you speak to the PLO, Hamas will not talk to you. If you speak with Hamas delegitimizing the PLO, then what do you do? So even if, and I'm not saying there is potential for this now, there's a big problem on the Palestinian side when the fanatic religious terror group called Hamas took power and killed PLO people in Gaza, kicked them away, got control over Gaza, and they are not partners. They say they will never talk with Israel because Israel should not exist. The PLO didn't say it. I thought we could come to an agreement. Didn't work so far. We need to come back to it. And I'm not in the government. So if you ask me, this is my personal position, yes.
I mean, well, outsiders and critics, when you talk about the situation and how you can negotiate with the Palestinian side, given what you just described between Hamas and the PLO, and the issue there is outsiders and critics of Israel's current strategy are saying that Israel is trying to bomb its opponents into some sort of solution or around the negotiating table. I mean, you very much clear that you're not part of the current government and that you're part of an opposition force at the moment. But do you think the government has pursued the right strategy with this aggressive military strategy in both Gaza and now in Lebanon as well?
Well, first of all, it was not aggressive in the sense that it was a reaction. It was not initiated by us. I can ask, what do you think any country you think of, you might come from Britain, would do if all of a sudden another country or a neighbor attacks it, rapes, kills, maims, and kidnaps people and say, that's it, don't do a thing. One day strike back. One day do try to hit the guys who did it. One day try to teach a lesson. I don't speak of revenge, just to prevent things happening like this in the future. Every normal country, not aggressive and not arrogant, would have to defend its citizens against such an unprovoked attack, such barbarism that we have witnessed, and our people were killed and kidnapped. You didn't hear the stories I heard today again and again. I don't forget these days with our calls for help, and there was nobody coming to help because yes, they caught out by surprise, and they killed people, young people dancing in a dance party, and people taken from their beds, and people kidnapped, people raped. It's an awful. It's like barbarism comes back to the 21st century. What are we supposed to do? Say, keep the people there. We don't want them back. Our citizens will be in your hands, and you can go on doing it. Of course, we had to strike back. And Hezbollah, with no reason, attacked us after that to join, to help the Hamas. So are we supposed not to do anything? Yes, we hit back. Unfortunately, in those exchange of fire, some innocent people are hit, and this is a very tragic result of wars. And we should do, and I think we do everything we can. I'm not in the business now to avoid unintended consequences, civilian casualties. But when the enemy or the other side hides within civilian population, not in camps of army, when they hide within the city or down in the basement of houses in Beirut or in Lebanese other cities, what are we supposed to do? Do they have immunity? So we try to warn the civilian population, leave, don't stay there because we don't want to hurt you. But yes, unfortunately, people are hurt, and this I not only am not happy, I'm sorry for everybody who is hurt, who is not part of the game. But they are attacking us from there. So what are we supposed to do?
Indeed, it's a lot of even Israel's opponents recognised Israel's right to defend itself after the events of October 7th. And elsewhere in the show, we're speaking to the families of people who were killed in terrible circumstances in Israel on October 7th, and people whose family members are still being held hostage as well. However, it's hard to ignore criticism that stems not only from members of the public worldwide, but also from top leaders as well. Thinking of France's Emmanuel Macron over the weekend saying that he wants to limit arms sales to Israel, and then having a very frank, as it was called, discussion with Netanyahu. And then today, Turkey's President Erdogan vowing Israel will pay a price for, quote, the genocide in Gaza. So it's not just sort of analysts, observers, members of the public, it's leaders of major countries as well. So how do you contend with that?
Well, you know, I think of the Turkish leader, Mr. Erdogan, who knows something of genocide. After all, ask the Armenians, they will tell you what genocide means in Turkish terms. To speak of us committing genocide is a shame. We don't want to kill anybody who is not part of that war against us. We have been attacked. We haven't attacked people. We have offered them Palestinian statehood. We left Gaza altogether in 2005 without anything in return. Said, take the land, make it your own Palestinian state for the first time in history. The result was that the Hamas took over from the PLO, killed PLO people, and made it a launching pad of rockets and terror against us. So where is genocide here? It's shameful to even speak of that, of the Jewish people who had the worst genocide ever in history. Do we commit genocide? Yes, it's very, very tough that people who are innocent people are sometimes hurt in times of war. I think the same thing would have happened in the Second World War in Germany, innocent people with the Nazi regime. It happens more, it's bad. I don't like it. I don't want anybody to get killed if he's not part of the game. But what do you do when the fight is not in the battlefield, but in cities, from cities, when they hide the weapons and the whole control system in the cities, in the houses? So yeah, that's not a genocide. It's simply not true. And we need to end the story as soon as possible and teach a lesson to those who think they can do these things and be impugned. This is not the case. The last thing we want to see is war. We were living without a war. We offered compromises. Less so this government, I have to admit, Netanyahu has a different approach, but the earlier Netanyahu, 12 years ago, offered the Palestinian state in public. And as I said, that Rabin and Peres and Olmert and Barak all offered it, and there was no response. But this has nothing to do with Hamas. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. They want one state, from the river to the sea, all Palestine, no Israel. So what are we supposed to say? Okay, take us.
Listen, we appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today, making time for us. Former Deputy Prime Minister of Israel and former Minister of Intelligence and Atomic Energy, Dan Meridor.
Thank you very much. Good to have you.
In Gaza, the humanitarian toll continues to grow as the Israeli military, after ordering civilians to urgently evacuate northern Gaza's densely populated Jabalia refugee camp, unleashed a heavy bombardment, resulting in the deaths of 17 people, including at least 9 children. Since the conflict reignited in October 2023, the scale of destruction has been staggering, with Israel's strikes on Gaza claiming the lives of at least 41,909 people and leaving 97,303 wounded.
What are we left with? Let them kill us once and for all with chemicals and get rid of us. Why should we stay alive when I can't find medicine or a blanket for the tent, and I can't find medicine for myself? I'm chronically ill. We didn't expect the war to last a year and for all of this to happen. Today, it's a year since the war started, and we were displaced from Khan Yunis, then Rafah, then Deir al-Bala. We are demanding a solution. This is not a war, it's a business. We were fighting for Jerusalem. Today, we are fighting to return to Gaza City, and we are asking all the Arab countries to support us. We miss our homes and our loved ones. Nobody cares about us.
For more, I'm joined by the Palestinian ambassador to Denmark and former ambassador for the Palestinian mission in the United Kingdom, Manuel Hassassian. Sir, thanks for making time. And you'll appreciate we're speaking to several Israeli voices in the show as well. But I want to ask you the same question I've asked a lot of them, which is, what does the 7th of October mean to you?
The 7th of October means the perpetuation of occupation and the destruction and the decimation of an entire nation, i.e. the Palestinians. Starting in Gaza, finishing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, this has been the systematic policy of a far-right wing governments in Israel, headed by Netanyahu. So for me, October 7 is not the beginning of the conflict, but we have to go back 70 years in retrospect to talk about this epistemic community conflict that had been lingering for several decades now. And everybody is putting the onus on October 7 as if that this conflict started on October 7. No, October 7 is a perpetuation of an ongoing systematic policy of Israelis who want to get rid of the demography and get the geography. What we're witnessing today in Gaza is another type of reoccupation of Gaza, let alone the expansion of settlements. And the settlers attack like a gun-ho mentality on the Palestinians in the West Bank is the conclusion of a synchronization of the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem as an occupied, basically, territory that will be ceded to Greater Israel. This is how I look at October 7.
Talk to us about what the situation is like in Gaza right now.
The situation in Gaza has been terrible. It's every day, it's being worse and worse and worse, as if there is no meaning for the lives of the Palestinians. Israelis are killing, shoot to kill with the license from the West, just pondering and looking at Israel, the way it has been, conducting its genocidal, its butchery against the Palestinians with the help of the United States and that of the United Kingdom. Basically, is a badge of dishonor to the international community to see how the innocent Palestinians are being, slaughtered like animals, with nobody even raising a finger to tell Israel, stop this carnage, stop this, what you're doing now. And that is extremely bad, because, you know, this will not end by itself. It has to be ended by the international community. And it's a shame that people are being killed under the rubric of Israel is defending itself. This is a shame, and the people in the world should be ashamed of themselves not to intervene and to stop this carnage.
Now, let's talk about the international community there. You say that countries, you've cited the US, the UK for supporting Israel. Other countries have come out in recent weeks and said they will no longer, or they will seek to no longer supply arms or limit arms supplies. I'm thinking specifically about France. President Emmanuel Macron, he then had what's called a frank conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu about those comments. Do you welcome that move from Macron?
Well, you know, Macron became proactive, basically, when the situation in southern Lebanon started to escalate. As you know, the patrons of Lebanon are the French. So we have seen the French now being more actively involved in the process because, you know, all the weapons that have been sent by America, by Canada, by the US, by the French even, you know, by the Danish and what have you, are sent to Israel, basically, to continue with its bombardments of Gaza and southern Lebanon. And now, when Lebanon is being, you know, the tension is being escalated so much now, to the point where it will hurt the interests of the French as patrons, you know, in the area. He came up with this statement saying that we have to stop, you know, sending arms to Israel because Israel is going with impunity, you know, by, you know, committing these atrocious crimes against the Palestinians. So I'm not surprised from such an action, but we have to say how much political weight this has on Israel to stop, basically, its bombardments of civilians, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza.
Does it have any political weight? Do you think it makes a difference when you get statements, at least like that?
Well, I will tell you, this is an embarrassment. As long as the United States is unequivocally, unwavering, supporting Israel, there is no political weight for European countries.
So do you think that this was part of Israel's strategy? And I've heard this from various analysts that with regard to what they have embarked on in the second front with Lebanon was timed during this period of the US election cycle where there isn't a very active government at the moment. Just want to ask you that.
Yeah, well, let me tell you this. Now the United States, Biden is a lame duck. There is elections coming up on November 5. And of course, the Israelis are continuing, you know, with their heinous crimes against the Palestinians, let alone in southern Lebanon. And between now and November 5, Netanyahu continues basically to flatten Gaza, to flatten southern Lebanon, and to keep on creating conducive conditions for the settlers to take over, you know, lands from the Palestinians in the West Bank, let alone to make life extremely miserable for the residents in Jerusalem. And by buying time and trying to conclude what he has in mind, the strategy of reoccupation of Gaza, the West Bank, and what have you, he will guarantee that he will not be indicted. He will guarantee that he will be the hero that delivered Israel from October 7. He will be the hero that created, you know, zones of security zones in Gaza and that of the West Bank and Jerusalem. And then by the time, if the elections takes place, he could basically, if Trump wins the elections, he is a natural ally for him. If Kamala Harris wins the elections, the United States administration will stick to its guns in helping Israel against all odds in the Middle East.
So you don't have much hope beyond the US election for support for your cause?
No, I don't see it. I can't see it unless there is a massive movement around the world globally for these governments who are considered to be extreme right wings in Europe. They should be changed. A new mentality should come, a new perception, new cognitions should emerge in order to change the preset or the predetermined, perceptions of all these governments that have been supporting Israel. It is a long way battle politically and diplomatically for us Palestinians to achieve this. It will take a long time, let alone the Palestinians are paying the heavy price of casualties, let alone those in Lebanon. And until the dust settles, we are going to see dramatic changes happening in the geography of the Middle East.
We certainly seem to be seeing that. And in terms of the international support you're getting, or you feel like you're lacking, but there was one other comment, at least today, that came out very strongly in support of Palestinian people. Turkey's President Recep Erdogan vowing that Israel would pay a price for, quote, the genocide in Gaza. How did you receive those comments?
Well, actually, okay, we receive all kinds of good comments, but we are interested in actions. If those are not concretized in actions, I mean, this is a charlatan talk. It doesn't mean anything to us. What we need to see is an actual position. First of all, let Erdogan, kick the Israeli ambassador from Turkey. Stop the billions of dollars of trade exchange between Turkey and that of Israel. We can see action now. Take Israel to the International Court of Justice. Come up with a statement that these are, human rights violators and they are committing a crime against humanity. We need to see action plan. Statements like that are just hollow statements. If they're not backed up by a concrete plan where you can see that Israel will be affected by the severing of such a relationship between a country like Turkey, then we can say, yes, there is an impact, and that impact will be plausible to see a certain kind of a reaction of Israel when it comes to the Palestinians and taking certain steps backwards from their intentions of taking over, from their intentions of reoccupying the territories again under the rubric of self-defense.
Understood. Look, I just want to, before we move on to talk about back on Gaza, I want to talk again on international support. You brought up Denmark with regards to the, I believe, the funding of weapons supplies to Israel. And you've also mentioned the UK. You have been Palestinian ambassador to both of those nations. So you clearly have a very strong position on the support that those nations still provide to Israel. What are those conversations like for you diplomatically when you're trying to get in rooms in Denmark and in the UK and try and convince people of your cause and for the plight of the Palestinian people?
Well, I cannot vouch or say anything about the UK because I left the UK 6 years ago. I don't want to make any statement on that. But I know for a fact that Britain still is sending arms and heavy arms to Israel. But I can talk about the Danish government. I have met at the foreign ministry with the director of MENA, and I told her I registered a complaint about your government sending arms to Israel. She said, we don't send arms to Israel. We are part of the F5 industry that makes spare parts to F-16 and F-32 and what have you. I said, but she said, we're not alone. We are part of several European countries who are involved in the production of such spare parts for these weapons. I said, can't you stop these spare parts, not be part and parcel of this organization that goes across Europe in sending, these spare parts for the F-16 and the F-19 and the F-32 that are constantly bombing our people in Gaza? She said, well, it's not like sending them arms. I said, no, it's like sending them arms. These are spare parts that make these, fighters to continue their bombing of our people. So she took it, with a grain of salt, or with the salt of a grain. I don't know how you want to take it, but eventually she said, I will raise that with the government, with the prime minister and with the foreign minister. So far, they did not come back to us with a note verbal telling us that either they have stopped working with these companies or they are still working with these companies. And to my knowledge, they are still working with these companies. So my criticism will be continuous. against, the Danish government from that perspective that they are still supporting Israel with weapons.
Very interesting insight. Thank you for sharing that. Look, I just want to ask, obviously your focus is on the Palestinian people, not on Lebanon, but when you saw what was happening with Israel, sort of as people have termed it, opening up a second front into Lebanon with regards to military action in the last fortnight, what did you think? Where did you think things would go from there, given your experience of what's happened in Gaza?
Well, let me assure you one thing. Israel now is trying to justify a war against Lebanon and against the Palestinians as a defensive war, as if they are defending themselves as occupier, as if we are threatening their security, okay, and they're defending themselves. This is considered to be an onslaught that is strategically very obvious militarily, that they want to create buffer zones of security in southern Lebanon and try to finish Hezbollah as much as they can, but to no avail because Hezbollah is not going to be finished. By the same token, they want also to reoccupy half of Gaza, to use it as a buffer zone, and by trying to get rid of Hamas. And they failed also dismally in that. But they will continue on these two fronts as long as Americans are giving them the green light. So they want to get rid of the human beings, what they call terrorists, as many as they can in order to secure boundaries in Gaza and in southern Lebanon for the coming 20 years without bothering with anything called resistance movement. And of course, the Houthis, the Iraqis, the Americans will handle them. And let alone, the only card that is left for the Israelis with the Americans is how basically to contain Iran, and to contain Iran not militarily because the price is going to be very heavy on Israel and America, but to contain them politically with some kind of incentives that will be plausible for the Iranians to accept, because I believe that Iran's influence anymore within the resistance is becoming more and more peripheral, weak, and not strong, as these fighters have anticipated, before they have embarked in resisting such an atrocious occupation.
Understood. Yeah, there was analysis about how strong that relationship was. As you heard, Iranian remarks sort of basically not distancing from Hamas or Hezbollah in the weeks before things really ratcheted up, but just sort of saying, well, they have the means to fight themselves. But we really have seen Iran intervene in the past week, which leads me just to ask you, what are your concerns for the coming weeks for the entire region?
I tell you, the entire region will still continue to escalate in Gaza and in southern Lebanon until, they feel that the resistance in both sides is weakening. And as long as they can go foot on the ground and try more or less to control territories, that will be their intentions. But they cannot do that until they can continue bombarding southern Lebanon and Gaza to the point where it becomes secure for the soldiers to go, personally, and to reoccupy parts of Gaza and to reoccupy, the southern part of Lebanon. And then they will talk about, having an armistice with the Lebanese government on the southern part of Lebanon and trying more or less to flirt with the Palestinian Authority that, okay, we might accept as a result of the Americans' pressures that the Palestinian Authority should come and rule the remaining parts of Gaza. And they might, stop, all these attacks by the settlers and give some breathing air for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem and try to mend the situation according to their own strategic vision, i.e. reoccupation, restructuring, redividing the Middle East into enclaves of colonies. And this is what's the intention that have been put by the America as a long strategy, and what Israel is doing myopically as a local tactic will eventually synchronize at best to view the Middle East in a different perspective. There is a decision that we cannot go back to the status quo ante.
Palestinian ambassador to Denmark and former ambassador to the Palestine mission in the United Kingdom, Manuel Hassassian. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, my next guest lost her aunt and a young cousin when Hamas attackers rampaged through kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th last year. Abby On, thank you for taking the time to speak with me and talk to us about what this day will forever mean for you.
All of the family at the kibbutz where Carmela was born. She and her granddaughter Noga are buried there, and in Jewish tradition, you go 30 days after the burial and 1 year later as well. So we gathered there today as a family to remember them, to commemorate them, to strengthen one another, because as much as we're grieving them, we're still fighting for Ofer, who's being held in Gaza.
Yeah, you've still got family being held hostage. And I mean, talk to me about the hope that you've got that you will be reunited.
I think the only thing we have right now is hope. I mean, I think there's sadness and disbelief and anger and fear. I think there's every emotion, but if we lose hope, then I think we lose our strength also. And so today feels unreal that we're 1 year later and continuing to tell this story instead of talking about how we're reunited and how the hostages are back and how whatever's happening in this region is de-escalated.
It must feel incredibly surreal and also unbelievably difficult to talk about again and again in media interviews like this one. So do you do them in order to keep the story out there?
1,000%. I think, and I'm afraid that we've gotten to a point 366 days on where it's a lot of thoughts and prayers. And I think the more we say their names, the more that we talk about Ofer and Shiri and Naama, and all of the 100 are there, whether they're alive or dead. We need people around the world to remember them, that they are innocent civilians who were stolen from their homes and from a party and have been held against their will in awful, awful conditions for a year. And we need the people of the world to rise up and to demand from their leaders that these people be returned home.
I wanted to ask you that about the statements we've been getting from world leaders around the world, as expected, large statements coming out from all the countries in the world talking about solidarity, a lot with you and a lot with your people like your family who were affected by the events of October 7th, but of course also talking about the political situation. How much do those statements mean to you?
Look, I'm grateful that they're acknowledging the date. I think this is a date that will forever live in Israeli and Jewish history, but I would be happier if they would get around a table and figure out a deal in order to get the 100 people home, because as a country, we have been mourning and grieving and fighting and hoping for the last year, and we will not be whole until they're back. And so I'm grateful, again, that they're talking about it, but we need more than talk, we need action.
And in terms of the remaining 100 that people think are still in Gaza, of which unfortunately we don't know how many, of course, are still alive. Netanyahu today in a statement saying that he is still committed to getting those hostages home. Do you believe him?
Look, he's always said that there are two aims for the war. One, in the beginning, to defeat Hamas. I would say now that that's about defeating any proxy of the Islamic regime, including Hezbollah, the Houthis, and two, bringing the hostages home, one of which has a timeline. We saw on September 1st that 6 hostages were executed. They were alive, and then moments later, they were dead. And we need that aim to be the priority, because the 100 that are there, 33 of whom are confirmed dead, they need to be brought home. There's a chance to bring home living hostages. And that has to be the priority, not only of Israel, but of the United States and of every country around the world, because this is our responsibility as humans. It is our responsibility as Jews and Israelis, but also as humans, to bring home people who have been taken against their will. And we can't sit by idly. We can't just say we're thinking about them. We have to fight for them. We have to do everything we can to make sure that they are brought home.
And, a year ago when we started looking at this crisis as journalists and observing it from the outside. And I was in London. I interviewed a hostage negotiator at the time, and he was talking about the possibilities of getting the hostages out within a certain time frame and how dangerous it was beyond that, and talked about the pressure on families, people like you, dealing with people who are in captivity and hostage and the unknown. At the time, we were talking of timeframes of a few weeks or months. As you say, a whole year has passed. What's it like living with that every day?
So look, in the beginning of the war, when it was 3 members of the family that were held hostage, 52 days felt endless. And it was after 52 days that Sahar and Erez were returned, right at age 12 and 16 at the time. Every moment felt like a year. And at this point, I feel completely confounded that the world isn't talking about them. These are people from more than 30 countries. So many countries around the world have a citizen being held against their will. And if you actually let your brain think about what they're going through, if you look at the execution and the conditions that the 6 that were killed last month were kept in, it is horrifying. It is the worst nightmare you could imagine. And it's a reality. It's a reality for our family. It's a reality for our countrymen. And I think people look at it as a conflict and they're not thinking about the humanity. And there's so much humanity. Each one of them is a world to the people that love them. And for us in Israel, they are even bigger. And we could never imagine we would get to this point. And I think that's why it's critical that we continue to tell the story so that people think about what this would feel like if it had happened to them and what they would do.
I think that's very well put, because there's an element of people becoming, of course, desensitized to conflict news. We've seen that happen with the Ukraine-Russia conflict as well. When it leaves the headlines, people lose interest. So you doing interviews like this and putting that humanity back into the hostages and reminding us that they are nationalities around the world, perhaps it will help people relate further. Look, just talk to me about today, when you went back to the kibbutz for the memorial. How safe did you feel when you were there?
Look, there were sirens ringing around Israel, from Hamas and from Hezbollah to remind us that they're still there and that we're still fighting. We spent hours in our bomb shelter last week with this ballistic missile attack from Iran, and we know right now that there is an escalation. So I think I literally was just thinking that it's part of the terror, that you never know when the next attack is going to be, that you never know when the next siren is going to ring, that you never know if you get in the shower, get in the car, if you're going to be caught in needing to go to a bomb shelter. But I think on another level, being with all of our family members today was cathartic and critical. And I think that marking today and marking the murder of Carmela and Noya is necessary, as hard as it is. And also I took in that Erez and Sahar were there this time. When we buried Carmela and Noya a year ago, they weren't there because they were being held hostage. And this time they got to come and commemorate their grandmother and their cousin. But at the same time, their father was missing, and we are forever aware of that.
How are they doing, all things considered, given how long they were in a hostage situation, in captivity? How are they doing since then, now they're out?
At this point, they're physically okay, but they will never be emotionally or spiritually or mentally okay until their father is back. It's like a part of their body is missing, and they will never feel whole. They will never feel joy. They will never feel complete until they're home. He's home. And they are 12 and 17 years old right now. Erez is turning 13 this month. And this is not a fight for children. This is not a fight for teenagers. This is a moment where world leaders need to show bravery, need to show creativity, and need to put politics aside and find a way to bring these people home and understand that in doing so, they will de-escalate this conflict.
Do you have any hopes for that currently regards what you see happening diplomatically or politically? Do you see any voices out there? Perhaps you don't even want to watch the news, but do you see anybody doing anything where you think that is going to help us make progress?
I think it sounds a little bit upside down, but I think the more that the Islamic regime, the proxies of Iran, attack us, the more the West might understand how grave the threat is, not only to Israel, but to the West. And so I think in many ways we're fighting the world's war. And I hope that they see the threat and understand that this doesn't stop with us. This doesn't stop with this tiny strip of land that we know to be Israel, that this is coming for others. And in the same way that the United States responded to terror in the aftermath of 9/11, we need the world to stand up to terror now. I think everyone can agree that Israel, the people of Israel, and the people of Palestine aren't going anywhere. But the organizations that are unleashing terror in this region need to be stopped. And I think that we need leaders who can stand up to that.
And what strikes me about speaking to you, Abby, is that, because obviously as part of this show, we're speaking to politicians, ambassadors and the like, but then we're speaking to people like you who've been personally so affected by what happened a year ago and since then. And you're speaking with such clarity about the political situation because clearly it is part of your fight, as well as remembering those you've lost, as well as campaigning for those still in captivity. You seem to be very, very focused on the politics and what's happening around you and trying to make sense of that. I mean, how much of that is about dealing with your everyday reality?
I think I've never felt more like an adult in the last year in trying to understand the complexities of this region and what's happening and how people in power impact these kinds of situations. And I wish for one moment that they could put aside the politics and the money and the need for power, right? The United States is in an election year, and I think that deeply impacts what's happening here. And said, there are people, including the hostages, including the people in Gaza, including the close to 100,000 Israelis who've been displaced from their homes, who are suffering. And there has to be a way to end that suffering. That has to be the number one goal of all the people around the table. And that's what we're trying to figure out. Because as someone who's lived in Israel for close to a decade, I don't think anyone I know wishes ill on the people of Gaza or any Palestinian. But we woke up on October 7th to a war we didn't start, to horror that we never could have imagined. And now a year on, all we want is our family home. And once that happens, I believe that the leaders will find a way to end the fighting. But the fighting won't stop until our family members are home.
And when it comes to that fighting, we've obviously seen footage of demonstrations in cities across Israel and heard the voices of people fighting to get the hostages returned home, but also deep criticism of Netanyahu's government. What's it like dealing with all of that? Is it a hostile environment to be campaigning in, to be thinking of your loved ones?
It's not so much hostile as heartbreaking. You know, leading up to October 7th, which we of course never imagined, there was already a deep schism. I have a siren. I need to go. I'm sorry.
That was, of course, Abby on there making her way to a bunker in order to get safety while an air raid siren was sounding. And we will continue with further interviews here on Global News Today. I'm joined now from Beirut by the Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc, Michel Helou. Thank you for making time. Talk to us about what today has been like in Lebanon.
Thank you. The situation is very, very difficult. You know, the nights specifically are terrible. We try to sleep with the sound of bombs and we wake up with the sight of fumes and smoke and destruction. And I'm lucky because I'm part of the ones who can still live in their homes. And, you know, knowing that a lot of people, thousands of people have lost their houses and 1.2 million Lebanese were forced to leave their villages. So the situation is extremely, extremely difficult. Villages are trying to accommodate for internally displaced people. There's thousands of shelters, hundreds of schools, public schools that have been used as shelters with local communities trying to help out, with NGOs, with civil society, with individuals, normal citizens coming, rising up to the task, to the challenges in order to help their fellow Lebanese compatriots that are suffering from the bombings and from this disastrous humanitarian situation, knowing that the Lebanese state is extremely weakened. We've been dealing with a disastrous financial and economic crisis for the last 5 years. The banks have collapsed, the currency has collapsed. So this only makes the situation more difficult. And the Israeli bombings do not stop. They do not stop. They start usually around midnight, with preceded by some warnings by the Israeli spokesperson on Twitter. They basically send Twitter messages 15 minutes or maximum an hour before the strikes and tell people to evacuate. But how can people evacuate in 15 minutes or in 30 minutes or an hour? It just adds to the trauma of the population, to the fear. I think it's also a psychological tactic that is being used. And, this bombing is unending. All the people say that this is much worse than the 2006 war that Israel had waged on Lebanon already, and that had already destroyed large parts of the country.
In terms of the build-up that got to this point, did you think you would be at this point with so many displaced in Lebanon, with bombs raining down on Beirut? There was, of course, a lot of cross-border tension. There were missiles fired by Hezbollah across the border into Israel throughout the course of the last year, especially since October 7th. And did you think that you would end up here now?
When you live such a disaster, you never really believe it until you get there. Although a lot of people, especially specifically, we were part of the people who were actually warning of the potential of a looming war. And we've been saying that for a year. Stop the fighting, cease the fire. But no matter how much you warn, no matter how much you say that, you only really realize it when you're under the bombing and when you see your country collapsing and being destroyed. However, definitely, Hezbollah does bear responsibility. It's not just the Israelis that bear the entire responsibility. Obviously, they're the ones destroying our country. But let's also remember that on October 8th, Hezbollah opened the front, and that many Lebanese, in fact, all Lebanese political forces, apart from Hezbollah, were against, or nearly all of them, were against opening this front. We've been telling Hezbollah for a year, stop the fighting, stop launching rockets, because we're not getting anywhere. Are we really supporting the Palestinian cause with that? Who really wants to have our country involved? What is the meaning of this unity of France theory? Where are we going with that? And in fact, we had a chance, I believe, a year ago, or until a couple of weeks ago, we had a chance to stop the fighting. But now the balance of power has changed completely. The Israelis have the upper hand, and I believe that with the current government, the fanatic government of Benjamin Netanyahu, they're really not willing to stop. And this is extremely scary for our country.
Indeed, in a previous interview before the major attack started on Lebanon, you talked about the overwhelming sympathy that many Lebanese have for the high humanitarian toll in Gaza, but that the cost of Hezbollah's intervention could be too high to bear. Are you now bearing that?
Definitely. And I think that the sentiment has only grown stronger. I think that the Lebanese stand united against the Israeli aggression. I think that the Lebanese have shown incredible solidarity and unity with one another, helping one another everywhere across the country, welcoming internally displaced people who've lost their homes, who've lost their loved ones. But I think that now is the moment also where we need political unity, and political unity with a clear vision, political unity behind the state, political unity behind the army that we need to work on strengthening, political unity behind seizing the fire and strengthening our institutions, and having a proper vision in order to exit this war of the axes, to not rely on anyone, because we've been relying on foreign powers and on foreign influence for at least the last 50 years, if not more, in the history of Lebanon. And every time we learned at our expense that relying on a foreign country is a mistake. It is always a mistake. We can have allies, we can build alliances, but we always need to rely only on our own national political interests. And I think that this is what we need to get back to. So now what we need is proper, large a discourse that will bring everyone together and a large political unity in order to come back to our state and to rebuild it.
Let's talk about how we get there, because, of course, you speak from the political point of view, being Secretary General of Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. A lot of international viewers who may be not that familiar with Lebanon might be asking, why is there just a caretaker prime minister at the moment? Why was Lebanon so vulnerable right now to this happening? How have Hezbollah been able to rise so much? You previously also said there's a major role for diplomacy, which the Lebanese government has not played since the beginning. It's been completely absent. What did you mean by that?
Diplomacy is fundamental, and I think that way too many people have forgotten that in the region, starting with the Israelis. Israel might be having some tactical military wins, but there is no proper strategy. In fact, a lot of people are saying that Israel is now trying to destroy a problem it helped create when it invaded the country and occupied the country for 18 years, starting 1982. And the reality is that if they keep going that way, invading and destroying our country, you might end up with worse than Hezbollah. So what we need is proper diplomacy. And on our side, as Lebanese, we have a role to play. We need a political alternative. People want a political alternative. We're working, all of us as Lebanese political forces, on a political alternative. But Israel cannot bomb us into building a political alternative. Now, it's true that the Lebanese institutions have been blocked, let's say, over the last 16 to 18 years, since 2008 specifically, when Hezbollah did a mini coup on May 7, 2008. And then we ended up with what we call the Doha agreements that were signed in Qatar after a short-lived civil war where Hezbollah invaded Beirut. This Doha agreement basically put a nail in the coffin of the Lebanese constitution, and it allowed Hezbollah to start blocking the institutions gradually. It turned our consociational, so our let's say, collective democracy into some sort of a vetocracy where they were basically able to stop any decisions they were not allowed, they didn't agree with. And recently, this showed very clearly with Hezbollah preventing us from electing a president for the Republic. So it's been 2 years that we're trying to elect the president, and that Hezbollah is blocking that process. So they have been part of the all the attempts to block, and they've been, let's say, the main cause for the blocking of the institutions. Now, what we want and what we need is a large movement that will basically stand up and say, we do face the Israeli aggressions. However, and now is not the time. Now is not the time to, let's say, to come back to the past disagreements and to solve all those past issues. Now is the time to all gather, come back to the constitution, and rebuild our state behind the army and behind the institutions. That means first a ceasefire, and parallel to the ceasefire, electing a president. And now is an urgency to open the parliament that Hezbollah has been forcing us to close for the last 2 years. Open a parliament to elect that president, and apply the international resolution starting with the 1701.
Let's talk about some of, you previously mentioned allies and supporters, and let's talk neighbours as well. You know, Jordan's foreign minister meeting your caretaker prime minister today in Beirut, and his words were that Israel is pushing the Middle East into the abyss of full-scale regional war. Do you agree with that?
I think he's totally right, and I think that his voice is very much needed. The way Israel is behaving is pushing all of us into something extremely dangerous. And although Netanyahu might believe that he's on a tactical winning streak because he's assassinating his opponents left and right, in the end, where does he want to get? Will the Israeli people, will the Jewish people feel safer if Netanyahu fights on 7 fronts and ignites 7 fronts at the same time? Does he realize that 45,000 at least killed people in Gaza will be a scar that we will bear on all the people's conscience in the region here, and that this will prevent us from having stability and peace on the longer term. And I think that all of this is extremely, extremely dangerous. October 7 has, and what followed of massacres and of destruction and of plausible genocide, as the International Court of Justice says, all of that has basically created a huge gap in the consciousness between East and West, between religions, between Israelis and their neighbors, between Arabs and the rest of the world. And I think that all of that is extremely dangerous. So now is the time for a bit of maturity, a bit of courage, some vision, and the ability to say the solution will not be military, the solution will be political and diplomatic.
I appreciate it's difficult to talk about this right now whilst your city, whilst your country is under military attack and aerial raids, but can you find any source of hope at the moment? Is there anything you're clinging on to with regards to a future, more peaceful future?
I think that internally the Lebanese have shown quite an exceptional amount of solidarity. I think that the Lebanese political class is hopefully going to show to be more mature than we previously thought. And some people, so there's a new generation that is rising, which we are part of, which we're working with. And we believe that this new generation is also able to push across all sectarian differences and sectarian lines, able to push for a national unity front that will bring back all the Lebanese forces, all the Lebanese political forces behind a national unity front and behind institutions. So those two things, the maturity of our people and hopefully of some of our political leaders, will bring us to a better situation. But we also need a huge pressure from the international community. And here we're specifically expecting from the United States that they show that they're able to pressure Israel. Because otherwise, if the Israeli policy is just a policy of destroying everything, it won't get us anywhere. So we also need, in order to have to basically believe in this hope, we also need a very strong support from the United States, which until now we haven't gotten and we haven't seen. On a larger scale in the region, I think that it will take a lot of time in order for us to heal the wounds, specifically of the war in Gaza and of the massacres that have been committed there.
Secretary General of the Lebanese political party National Bloc, Michel Halou, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you for watching and be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.